The pistol on Silas McGraw's hip gleamed in the lamplight as Evelyn's father pushed the contract across the table. "Sign it, and the water's yours." Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway of her own home, watching her life being bartered away like cattle at auction. 22 years old, and she was the price of survival. But outside, a stranger's campfire flickered in the darkness, and by dawn, everything would change. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Wyoming sun had no mercy in the summer of 1875. It beat down on the Hartwell Ranch like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, relentless and unforgiving, turning the earth to dust and the grass to brittle straw that crumbled under a horse's hooves. The creek that had run clear and cold through the property since Evelyn's grandfather first staked his claim had dwindled to a muddy trickle, barely enough to water the remaining cattle that stood listless in what little shade they could find. Evelyn Hartwell stood at the kitchen window, her hands submerged in dishwater that had already been used twice and would be used again tomorrow. Water was precious now, more precious than gold, more precious than pride, and apparently more precious than a daughter's freedom. She was 22 years old, with hair the color of honey that she kept braided down her back, and eyes that her mother used to say were storm gray, like the sky before the rain comes. But the rain hadn't come, not in 4 months, not since her mother had died of fever, leaving Evelyn to care for her father and younger brother in this house that felt too empty and too full at the same time. Through the window, she could see her father, Thomas Hartwell, standing near the barn with 2 men. Even from this distance, she recognized them. One was Silas McGraw, the wealthiest rancher in the territory, a man whose land stretched so far you could ride for 2 days and never reach the end of it. He owned the river, or at least he owned the land the river ran through, which amounted to the same thing when water was life itself. The other man was McGraw's foreman, a scarred, hard-eyed man named Dutch, who wore his guns low and his morals lower. Evelyn's hands stilled in the water. Her father's posture was wrong, shoulders slumped, head bowed. Thomas Hartwell had been a proud man once, a strong man who'd built this ranch with his own hands and his own sweat. But drought and death had worn him down to something she barely recognized. She dried her hands on her apron and walked to the door, stepping out onto the porch just as Silas McGraw's laugh carried across the yard. It was a sound like rocks grinding together, devoid of genuine humor. "You're a practical man, Thomas," McGraw was saying. "I've always respected that about you." Her father's voice was quiet. "There's got to be another way." "There isn't." McGraw's tone shifted, became almost gentle, which made it more dangerous. "Your herd's dying. Your land's dying. By autumn, you'll have nothing left but dust and memories. But I'm offering you salvation, water rights to the North Fork, enough to keep your cattle alive through winter. All it costs is a wedding." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. Her brother Samuel emerged from the barn, his face pale beneath the dirt and sweat. He was only 16, still lanky with youth, but he'd aged years in the months since their mother's death. His eyes found Evelyn's across the yard, and the horror in them confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. "Pa, no," Samuel said, his voice cracking. "You can't—" "Boy, this is men's business," Dutch cut him off, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Why don't you run along?" Samuel's jaw clenched, but he stayed rooted to the spot. Evelyn knew that stubbornness, it ran in the family like the color of their eyes. She stepped off the porch, her worn boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. "What wedding?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to her, her father's filled with shame, Dutch's with dismissive contempt, and Silas McGraw's with something that made her skin crawl, a proprietary satisfaction, like a man appraising livestock he'd already decided to purchase. "Evelyn, go back inside," her father said, but there was no force behind the words. "What wedding?" she repeated, stopping a few feet away. Up close, she could see the contract in McGraw's hands, the official-looking paper with its neat lines of text and blank spaces waiting for signatures. McGraw smiled, revealing teeth stained from tobacco. He was perhaps 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and a face that might have been handsome before cruelty hardened it. "Your father and I have reached an arrangement, Miss Hartwell, one that benefits both our families." "I'm not family," Evelyn said flatly. I'm property you're negotiating over. Evelyn, her father started, but she cut him off with a look. How long have you been planning this, Pa? How long have you been deciding my future without telling me? Thomas Hartwell seemed to shrink further. McGraw approached me last week. I hoped I could find another solution, but there isn't one. Without water, we'll lose everything. You and Samuel will have nothing. So instead, you're trading me away so you can keep your land? The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with betrayal that cut both ways. It's not like that, her father said weakly. Isn't it? She turned to McGraw, forcing herself to meet his eyes, even though everything in her wanted to run. And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. McGraw? Besides a wife young enough to be your daughter? McGraw's smile didn't waver. A partnership, Miss Hartwell. The joining of two properties into one of the largest ranches in Wyoming. Your father's land connects to mine in ways that are strategically valuable. And you... His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her feel naked despite being fully clothed. You are a woman of breeding and intelligence. You'll make a fine wife and mother. The emphasis on mother made her stomach turn. She thought of her mother, dead these 4 months, who would have horsewhipped any man who suggested such a thing. Margaret Hartwell had been fierce, loving, and completely devoted to the belief that her daughter should choose her own path. I won't do it, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. I won't marry you. Evelyn, please. Her father's voice cracked. We'll lose everything. Then we'll lose everything, she said. But at least I'll still have myself. Dutch laughed, a mean sound. You think you got a choice, girl? Out here, women don't got choices. They got fathers and husbands who make choices for them. Maybe where you come from, Evelyn shot back. But my mother taught me different. Your mother's dead, McGraw said, and though his tone remained conversational, there was steel underneath. And sentiment doesn't survive drought. Your father needs what I can provide. You need what I can provide. By the end of the month, we'll be married and this land will have water again. Everyone wins. Except me. You'll have security, wealth, a home that isn't falling apart around your ears. There are worse fates for a woman on the frontier. Yes, Evelyn said quietly, but there are better ones too. She turned and walked back toward the house, ignoring her father calling her name. Samuel fell into step beside her, and once they were inside, he grabbed her arm. Evie, what are we going to do? She looked at her brother, at his young face still holding on to hope that she wasn't sure she felt. I don't know, but I'm not marrying Silas McGraw. I'd rather die. Don't say that, Samuel whispered fiercely. Don't even think it. Through the window, they watched their father sign the contract. McGraw clapped him on the shoulder like they were old friends, then mounted his horse. Dutch followed, but not before casting one last look toward the house, a look that promised enforcement if promises weren't kept. As the two men rode away, Thomas Hartwell stood alone in the yard, the contract hanging from his hand like a death sentence. Evelyn didn't speak to her father at dinner. She prepared the meal, salt pork, beans, and the last of the bread, in silence, served it in silence, and ate in silence while Samuel tried and failed to make conversation. Thomas kept starting sentences and abandoning them, his food growing cold on his plate. Finally, as Evelyn rose to clear the dishes, he spoke. Your mother would understand. She stopped, her hands gripping the edge of the table. No, Pa, she really wouldn't. We're desperate, Evelyn. I wouldn't do this if... If what? If you had any other choice? But you do have a choice. You're just too proud to make it. What choice? His voice rose, frustration breaking through. Tell me, daughter, what choice I have that doesn't end with us starving or scattered? We could sell, she said, turning to face him. Sell to someone else, take what money we can get, and start over somewhere with water. This land has been in our family for 30 years. Your grandfather is dead, Pa, just like Mama. And I'll be dead too in a different way if you force me into this marriage. Thomas Hartwell looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and something crumbled in his expression. I don't know how to fix this. Then don't, Evelyn said softly. Don't fix it by breaking me. She carried the dishes to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she scraped the plates. Behind her, she heard her father push back from the table and walk out onto the porch. Through the window, she watched him stand there, staring out at the dying land he'd fought so hard to keep. Samuel appeared at her elbow. There's got to be something we can do. Like what? Run away? We've got no money, nowhere to go, and Pa would just give the ranch to McGraw anyway, probably as payment for losing his bride. Maybe, Samuel hesitated, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. McGraw's rich. You'd have— Don't, Evelyn cut him off sharply. Don't try to make this better than it is. I saw how he looked at me, Sam, like I was a horse he was thinking about buying. That's not marriage. That's ownership. Her brother's face flushed with shame. I'm sorry. I don't know how to help you. Neither do I, she admitted, sagging against the counter. Neither do I. That night, sleep refused to come. Evelyn lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around her. Every creak of wood sounded like her future closing in. Every whisper of wind through the eaves like the ghost of her mother asking what she was going to do. The answer was nothing. There was nothing she could do. In the morning, McGraw would send his men to begin digging the irrigation trenches. In 2 weeks, there would be an engagement announcement in the territorial newspaper. In a month, she'd be married in the church in town, wearing her mother's wedding dress that would now be a costume for a farce. Unless— the thought came unbidden, terrifying and tempting in equal measure, unless she disappeared. But that was fantasy. A woman alone on the frontier was prey. Without money, without protection, she'd last maybe a week before something or someone caught up with her. The wilderness was unforgiving, and civilization wasn't much better. She must have finally slept, because she woke to the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. Dawnlight was just beginning to paint the sky pale gold. Evelyn rose and went to the window, expecting to see McGraw's men arriving to begin their work. Instead, she saw a single rider leading a string of cattle. Maybe 30 head, all looking trail-worn but healthy. The man dismounted with easy grace, tall and lean in the way of men who lived most of their lives on horseback. He wore a dark hat pulled low, a dusty coat, and a gun belt that looked well used but not for show. As he walked toward the house, Evelyn caught a glimpse of his face, weathered by sun and wind, with strong features and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her father emerged onto the porch, and Evelyn quickly dressed and joined him, curiosity overriding her anger from the night before. "Morning," the stranger called, stopping at a respectful distance. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of somewhere farther south. "Name's Gabe Callahan. I'm trailing cattle up to Montana and was hoping you might have some grazing land to rent for a few days. My herd needs rest before we push through the mountains." Thomas looked at the cattle, then at the man. "Land's not in good condition. Droughts hit us hard." "I can see that," Gabe said, his eyes scanning the property with an expert's assessment. "But my cattle aren't picky, and I pay fair. $2 a day, cash money." $2 was more than fair. It was generous. Evelyn saw her father's expression shift, interest warring with suspicion about why anyone would pay so much for withered grass. "Your cattle look good," Thomas said slowly. "Well tended. I take pride in my work." Gabe's gaze shifted to Evelyn, and she found herself being assessed again, but differently than McGraw had looked at her. This wasn't appraisal of property. This was simple acknowledgement of another person, polite but direct. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." "Mr. Callahan," she responded, something about his manners and respectful distance easing the knot in her chest slightly. "Where you headed in Montana?" Thomas asked. "Got land up near Helena. Been building a ranch there for 3 years now. This is my second drive. Bought cattle in Texas, trailing them north." "Long journey." "Yes, sir, but worth it. Montana's still got open range, good grass, plenty of water." Gabe's expression remained neutral, but Evelyn caught something in his tone, a subtle emphasis on water that made her wonder if he'd noticed more than he was letting on. Her father was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You can use the east pasture. There's a creek, mostly dry, but there's a few pools left. Water your cattle there." "Appreciated." Gabe pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted out bills. 3 days enough?" "Should be." As money changed hands, real money, more cash than Evelyn had seen in months, she noticed Gabe's hands. They were work-roughened but careful, the hands of a man who'd built things and cared for things. No fancy rings, no ostentation, just competence and quiet confidence. "I'll set up camp by the creek," Gabe said. "I've got 2 hands with me. Good men, won't cause trouble. If you need anything, just holler." "Obliged," Thomas said, and there was something in his voice, relief, maybe, or simply the comfort of honest business after the ugliness of yesterday's negotiation. As Gabe walked back to his horse, Evelyn found herself watching him. There was something different about this man, something that stood in sharp contrast to Silas McGraw's predatory confidence. Gabe Callahan moved like someone comfortable in his own skin, needing nothing from anyone but willing to deal fairly with everyone. "Evelyn," her father said quietly, and she turned to find him watching her. "About yesterday." "Not now, Pa," she said, and went back inside. But as she prepared breakfast, her mind kept returning to the stranger and his cattle. 3 days, he'd said. 3 days, and then he'd be gone, heading north to Montana where there was land and grass and water, where there was freedom. The day passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work. Evelyn tended the kitchen garden, coaxing stubborn vegetables from soil that felt more like sand, and tried not to think about the contract her father had signed. Samuel helped Gabe and his men move the cattle to the east pasture, then spent the afternoon mending fence while shooting curious glances toward the camp by the creek. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Evelyn found herself drawn toward the east pasture. She told herself she was just checking on the cattle, making sure they hadn't broken through the fence or wandered too close to the house. The truth was more complicated. Gabe's camp was neat and well organized, 3 bedrolls around a small fire, supplies stored carefully away from where the horses were picketed. 2 men sat by the fire, one older with a gray beard, the other younger and dark-skinned. They looked up as she approached, then the older one nodded toward where Gabe stood checking his cattle. He noticed her before she'd decided what to say, turning from the small group of cows he'd been examining. Up close, she could see his eyes were a clear, startling blue, the color of summer sky, her mother would have said. "Evening, Miss Hartwell," he said, removing his hat. "Something wrong with the cattle?" "No, they're fine. I was just—" She trailed off, suddenly unsure why she'd come. "Checking on the stranger camping on your land?" A slight smile touched his mouth. "Can't blame you for that. Smart to be cautious." "Are you always this polite?" The question came out before she could stop it. His smile widened slightly. "My mother raised me right, and I found politeness gets you farther than pushiness in most situations." "Most?" "Well, sometimes you need to be pushy, but you start with politeness." He gestured toward a fallen log near the creek. "Care to sit? You look like you've got something on your mind." Evelyn hesitated. Propriety said she should decline, should return to the house where an unmarried woman belonged at dusk. But propriety was about to marry her off to a man she despised, so she sat. Gabe settled onto a rock a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the cattle low softly to each other and the evening birds begin their songs. "Your father seemed troubled yesterday," Gabe said finally. "More than just drought trouble. You're observant. Hard not to be when you live on the trail. You learn to read situations, read people. It can mean the difference between a successful drive and a disaster." Evelyn studied him, this stranger who'd ridden into her life at exactly the wrong, or perhaps exactly the right moment. "What do you read about our situation?" "I read a ranch that's hurting but still standing. A father who's scared but too proud to show it. A young woman who's angry about something specific, not just general hardship." He paused. "And I read fresh horse tracks from expensive horses, the kind rich men ride when they want to make an impression." "You read all that from tracks?" "Tracks in the way your father counted the money I gave him, like a man who needs cash but just accepted something that cost more than money." Gabe's blue eyes met hers. "None of my business, of course, but I found that when something feels wrong, it usually is." Evelyn looked away, toward the horizon where the sun was sinking like a burning coal. "My father sold me." The words hung in the air between them, blunt and ugly. Sold you, Gabe repeated, his voice carefully neutral, to the richest rancher in the territory, Silas McGraw, in exchange for water rights that will save our ranch. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Practical, really. One daughter for survival. Fair trade. That's not a trade, Gabe said quietly. That's extortion. Is there a difference when you're desperate? Yes. He said it with such certainty that she turned back to him. There's always a difference between choosing and being forced. Your father's being forced. You're being forced. That's not the same as choosing. Tell that to Silas McGraw. The wedding's in a month. Gabe was quiet for a long moment, his hands turning his hat in slow circles. Finally, he spoke. What do you want to do? What kind of question is that? The only one that matters. Not what your father wants, not what circumstances demand. What do you want? No one had asked her that. Not once. Not her father when he made the agreement, not Samuel when he tried to comfort her, not even her own mind as it raced through impossible scenarios. Everyone had asked what she would do, or what she should do, or what she had to do. No one had asked what she wanted. I want... She stopped, then started again. I want to choose my own life. I want to wake up every morning knowing that I'm where I am because I decided to be there, not because someone traded me like a horse or a piece of land. I want... Her voice caught. I want what my mother had with my father before the drought and the desperation. I want to be seen as a person, not property. Then don't marry him. It's not that simple. Isn't it? Gabe leaned forward slightly. I'm not saying it's easy, but simple and easy aren't the same thing either. Simple is just the truth. You don't want to marry him, so don't. And let my father lose everything? Let Samuel lose his home? Is your freedom worth less than land? The question hit her like a physical blow. That's not fair. No, Gabe agreed. None of this is fair. But you asking yourself what your freedom is worth, that's the question you need to answer before you decide anything else. Evelyn stood abruptly, emotions churning too hot and fast to sit still. You don't understand. You're a man. You can go where you want, do what you want. No one's trying to marry you off to secure water rights. You're right, he said, standing as well. I don't understand exactly what you're facing, but I understand being trapped. I understand making hard choices. And I understand that sometimes the only way out is through. Through to where? I have no money, no prospects, nowhere to go. A woman alone out here. She gestured at the vast, darkening landscape around them. Doesn't last long. Gabe looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. What if you weren't alone? What? What if... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. What if there was another option? Not your father's option, not McGraw's option, a third way. Evelyn's heart began to pound. What are you saying? I'm saying I need a few more days to figure out if what I'm thinking is completely crazy or just mostly crazy. He settled his hat back on his head. But I'm also saying don't do anything irreversible until we talk again. Can you do that? You've known me for 12 hours. I've known you for 12 hours, he agreed. And in that time, I've seen more genuine courage and spirit than I've seen in most people I've known for years. Sometimes you know things quick. Sometimes you just know. Know what? But he just shook his head. Let me think on it. We'll talk tomorrow. Evelyn wanted to press him, wanted to demand answers to questions she couldn't fully form. But something in his manner, that same quiet confidence she'd noticed earlier, made her trust that he meant what he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. As she walked back toward the house, she felt his eyes on her, and for the first time since her father had signed that contract, she felt something besides despair. She felt possibility. The next morning, Evelyn woke before dawn, her mind still churning with questions. What had Gabe meant about a third way? What could a stranger possibly offer that would solve the impossible situation she was in? She dressed quickly and started breakfast, but her thoughts kept drifting to the camp by the creek. Her father came down looking haggard, like he hadn't slept. Samuel was quiet, pushing eggs around his plate without eating. McGraw's men are coming today, Thomas said finally, to start the irrigation work. I know. Evelyn, we need to talk about No, she said flatly. We don't. She left the dishes in the sink and walked outside, needing air and space and anything but her father's guilty eyes. Without consciously deciding to, she found her feet taking her toward the east pasture again. Gabe was already up, checking his cattle with the practiced eye of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He saw her coming and met her halfway, his expression serious. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Could you? Not much. He glanced back toward his camp, where his 2 hands were building up the breakfast fire. I've been thinking about what we talked about yesterday. And I have a proposition for you. It's going to sound crazy, and you'd be well within your rights to tell me to mind my own business and ride on. But I think you should hear it before you make any final decisions. Evelyn's mouth went dry. I'm listening. Gabe took a breath, and she realized he was nervous, the first crack in his calm demeanor. Marry me instead. For a moment, she couldn't process the words. They hung in the air between them, impossible and absurd. What? Marry me, he repeated, holding up a hand as she started to speak. Not like that. Not really, but legally. We ride into town, get married by the justice of the peace, and then you come with me to Montana. You'd be my wife in name, which means McGraw can't touch you. Your father keeps his land because you'll have fulfilled the marriage contract, just not with the groom he expected. That's insane. Yes, Gabe agreed, completely insane. But is it more insane than marrying a man you don't love who looks at you like property? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and smart and you deserve better than what you're being forced into. And I know that I've got land in Montana, a house that needs a woman's touch, and no particular attachment to anyone. He paused. And I know that I'd rather ride north with a woman who chose to come with me than leave her here to face a future she's dreading. Why would you do this? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger? Because someone did the same for my sister once, he said quietly. When she was about your age, about to be forced into a bad situation. A stranger helped her get away, helped her start over. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, I would. What happened to your sister? She's happy now. Married to a good man she chose herself, 3 children, lives in California. His expression softened. She named her youngest after the man who helped her, said she wanted to remember that kindness exists, even when everything seems dark. Evelyn turned away, her mind reeling. Marriage. To this stranger who'd ridden into her life 2 days ago. It was mad, impulsive, possibly dangerous. It was also the first real choice she'd been offered. What would you want from me? She asked, not looking at him. If I agreed to this insanity, what would you expect? Nothing you don't want to give, Gabe said firmly. This would be an arrangement, not a real marriage. You'd have your own space, your own life, help around the ranch if you wanted, but we wouldn't be, he cleared his throat. It would be in name only, until and unless you decided otherwise. And if you never decided otherwise, that would be fine too. You're offering me freedom. I'm offering you a choice, he corrected. What you do with it is up to you. She turned back to him, studying his face for any sign of deception or hidden motive. But all she saw was honest intent and genuine concern. I don't understand why you do this, she said again. Maybe I'm just a fool who can't stand seeing injustice when he can do something about it. He smiled slightly. Or maybe I figure a ranch could use a woman's presence, and I'd rather have someone there who wants to be there than rattle around alone for the rest of my life. Take your pick. And if I say yes? How would this even work? We'd need to move fast, today if possible. We ride into town, get married, send word to your father that you've made your choice. By the time McGraw finds out, we'll be days away. My father will be angry, yes. But he'll still have his land, and McGraw will still need that water passage. He might bluster, but legally, you'll have fulfilled the contract, just not the way anyone expected. McGraw will come after us. Let him try, Gabe said, and there was steel in his voice now. I've dealt with men like Silas McGraw before. Bullies who think they can take what they want because they've got money and power. But you know what they can't stand? People who refuse to be bullied. Evelyn's heart was racing, her thoughts tumbling over each other. This was crazy. Absolutely, completely, utterly crazy. But so was marrying Silas McGraw. I need time to think, she said. We don't have much time. McGraw's men will be here soon to start work. Once that begins, once his claim on you is more public, it'll be harder to break free. How much time? I leave tomorrow at dawn, Gabe said. With or without you. If you decide to come, be ready before first light. Bring only what you can carry on one horse. We'll ride hard for 3 days to get across the territorial line before McGraw can organize pursuit. And if I don't come? Then I wish you the best, and I hope somehow it works out better than you fear. His blue eyes were steady on hers. But I won't lie to you. I don't think it will. I know, she whispered. A shout from the direction of the house broke the moment. They both turned to see riders approaching, 4 men in McGraw's colors, tools loaded on a pack horse. That's my cue to get back to my cattle, Gabe said. Think about what I said, Evelyn. You've got until dawn tomorrow. Choose your life. He walked away, leaving her standing by the creek with the morning sun warming her face and the most impossible decision of her life weighing on her shoulders. The rest of the day passed in a blur. McGraw's men worked on marking out irrigation trenches, their presence a constant reminder of the life closing in around her. Her father tried twice to talk to her, but she couldn't bear it, couldn't bear seeing the relief in his eyes that his gamble had paid off, that his land would be saved, even if it cost his daughter her freedom. Samuel found her in the barn that afternoon, mucking out stalls that didn't really need cleaning. Evie, he said quietly, I heard you talking to that cattleman this morning. She froze, then forced herself to continue working. Were you spying on me? I was worried about you. He came closer, his voice dropping. What did he want? To rent grazing land, you already know that. That's not what I meant. Samuel grabbed her arm, forcing her to stop and look at him. I saw how you were talking. Something's going on. Evelyn looked at her brother, young, frightened, already losing too much. Could she abandon him too? If I told you I had a chance to get away, she said slowly, to escape this marriage to McGraw, would you try to stop me? Samuel's eyes widened. The cattleman offered to help you? Answer my question. He was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with loyalty and love and the impossible position they were both in. Finally, he shook his head. No, I wouldn't stop you. But Evie, where would you go? What would you do? I can't tell you. If you don't know, Pa can't force it out of you. He wouldn't. He signed a contract trading me to Silas McGraw, Evelyn said flatly. I don't know what he would or wouldn't do anymore. He's desperate and scared. We're losing everything. We're not losing everything. He is. And he's decided I'm the price to pay to keep what he thinks matters. She softened her voice. I love Pa, Sam. I do. But I can't sacrifice my entire life for his mistakes. The drought wasn't his mistake. No, but refusing to sell when we had the chance was. Hanging on to pride when flexibility would have saved us was. And making deals with devils like McGraw instead of finding another way, that was a choice. Samuel looked down at his boots. What should I do if you leave? Take care of Pa. Work the land. And when you're old enough, make your own choices. Don't let anyone, not Pa, not anyone, tell you your life isn't yours to decide. When? He asked quietly. When are you leaving? I haven't decided yet. But they both knew she was lying. That night, Evelyn lay in bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. In her mind, she played out both scenarios. Stay and marry Silas McGraw. Live in his house, bear his children, slowly disappear into the role of wife and mother until the girl who dreamed of choices was just a memory. Maybe he'd be kind. Maybe she'd learn to be content, if not happy. Maybe it wouldn't be as bad as she feared. Or leave with Gabe Callahan. Ride north to Montana with a man she barely knew, married in name but not in truth. Risk everything on the hope that his offer was genuine, that he was who he seemed to be. Trade one, unknown for another, with no guarantee that this gamble would turn out any better than staying. The choice should have been impossible, but as midnight came and went, Evelyn realized she'd already decided. Maybe she'd decided the moment Gabe made his offer. Maybe she'd decided when her father signed that contract without telling her. Or maybe she'd decided years ago, watching her mother tend her garden and run her household and love her family, and still maintain that core of self that was hers alone. Her mother had chosen Thomas Hartwell freely, had built a life with him as a partner, not property. Evelyn wanted the same, and she wouldn't get it with Silas McGraw. 2 hours before dawn, she rose and packed. One small bag, her mother's locket, a few changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, and the small amount of money she'd saved over the years from selling eggs and vegetables in town. Not much, but it was hers. She wrote 2 letters, one to her father, trying to explain without being cruel. One to Samuel, shorter and simpler. Be brave. Be free. I love you. She left them on the kitchen table, weighted down with her mother's wedding ring, the one that should have gone to her someday, but wouldn't now. Then she saddled her horse, a gentle mare named Willow, and led her quietly out of the barn. Gabe was waiting by the creek, already mounted, his pack horse loaded. In the pre-dawn darkness, she couldn't see his expression clearly. "You came," he said, and there was relief in his voice. "I came," she agreed, "though I still think we're both crazy." "Probably," he agreed, "but sometimes crazy is the only sane choice." He gestured to the trail north. "It's a hard ride to town. 5 hours at good pace. We get there, get married, and keep riding. Can you do that?" Evelyn looked back at the house one last time, at the only home she'd ever known. Somewhere inside, her father and brother were sleeping, unaware that by the time they woke, she'd be gone. Grief and guilt warred with determination and hope. "I can do that," she said, and turned Willow's head north. They rode into the darkness, toward town and marriage, and a future that was unknown but chosen. Behind them, the Hartwell Ranch slept on, unaware that its daughter had just bought her freedom. At what cost? Only time would tell. But as the first gray light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt alive. The sky had shifted from black to deep purple by the time they reached the foothills, the horses moving at a steady canter that ate up the miles but didn't push them to exhaustion. Gabe set the pace with the expertise of someone who'd made countless trail drives, knowing instinctively when to push and when to ease back. Behind them, his 2 ranch hands, Frank, the gray-bearded older man, and Jesse, the younger dark-skinned cowboy, followed with the cattle, taking a different route that would draw less attention. Evelyn had ridden since childhood, but never like this. Never with purpose driving every hoofbeat, never with the weight of a life-changing decision pressing down on her shoulders. Every mile took her farther from everything she'd ever known, and closer to a future she couldn't predict. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the Badlands in shades of gold and crimson, Gabe finally slowed his horse to a walk. They'd been riding hard for nearly 2 hours, and both mounts were lathered with sweat. "There's a creek about a mile ahead," he said, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. "We'll water the horses and rest for a bit. You holding up all right?" "I'm fine," Evelyn said, though her legs were already aching and her back protested the pace. She wouldn't complain, though. She'd chosen this path, and she'd see it through. Gabe glanced at her, and something in his expression softened. "You don't have to prove anything to me. If you need to rest, we rest. We've got time before anyone even realizes you're gone." "How much time?" "Your father won't check your room until breakfast, which gives us maybe 3 hours head start. But we need to be across the county line before McGraw can get a message to the sheriff. That gives us until nightfall, maybe a little longer." He paused. "We'll make it. But we need to be smart about it." They rode in silence until they reached the creek, a small ribbon of water that somehow still ran clear despite the drought. The horses drank eagerly while Gabe pulled out some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. "Not much of a breakfast," he said, offering her a share, "but it'll keep us going until we reach town." Evelyn accepted the food, suddenly realizing she hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. The jerky was tough and salty, the hardtack barely better than eating leather, but her body needed fuel and she ate mechanically. "Tell me about Montana," she said after a few minutes. "Your ranch, what's it like?" Gabe settled against a rock, his hat pushed back. In the growing daylight, she could see him more clearly, the lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind, the scar along his jaw that suggested a hard past, the way his hands remained relaxed even as his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "Valley land with mountains to the west, river running through the property. Grass grows high enough in summer that you can lose a calf in it. Winters are hard, snow comes early and stays late. But there's timber enough for building and heating, and the cattle do well if you plan right." "How big?" "About 800 acres now. I'm working on buying the adjacent property, which would nearly double it." He smiled slightly. "Man I'm buying from is getting old, wants to move to town where his daughter can look after him. Says the winters are too much for his bones." "And the house?" "Solid. Built it myself with some help from neighbors. 2 bedrooms, main room with a fireplace, kitchen that's functional if not fancy, porch facing east so you can watch the sunrise over the mountains." He paused. "It's not much compared to what you're probably used to, but it's sturdy and it's mine." "Ours," he corrected, "if you decide to stay." "You keep saying that. If I decide to stay, what happens if I don't?" Gabe met her eyes steadily. "Then I help you get somewhere else. Got family in California, like I mentioned. Or if you want to go east, I'd make sure you had money for a train ticket and enough to get started somewhere. This isn't a trap, Evelyn. It's an opportunity. But opportunities only work if you want them." She studied him, this strange man who'd upended her entire world in less than 3 days. "Why are you really doing this?" "I told you, no, the real reason. Not the story about your sister, not the noble talk about helping someone in need. The real reason you'd marry a stranger and take her hundreds of miles north to a life that might not work out." Gabe was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. 5 years ago, I was engaged to a woman back in Texas. Sarah. We'd known each other since childhood, planned our whole lives together. Then one day, she told me she couldn't do it, couldn't marry me. Not because she didn't care for me, but because she'd realized she'd been making choices based on what everyone expected, not what she wanted. "What did you do?" I was angry at first, felt betrayed, embarrassed, but then I really listened to what she was saying. She'd spent her whole life being told what a woman should do, should be, should want. And she'd never stopped to ask herself what she actually wanted. He looked at Evelyn. I let her go. Helped her get to St. Louis, where she had an aunt. Last I heard, she was teaching school and happier than she'd ever been. And you? I realized something. I didn't want a wife who was with me because it was expected, or because she had no other choice. I wanted someone who chose to be there, chose me, chose the life we'd build together. He gestured to the landscape around them. That's why I came north, started fresh, built something that would be worth choosing. So this is, what? You're giving me the choice Sarah didn't have? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a man who's tired of seeing people trapped by circumstances when there's another way. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. Either way, we should keep moving. Town's still 3 hours away, and we want to get there before the telegraph office opens. They remounted and rode on, the sun climbing higher and the day growing warmer. The landscape gradually shifted from badlands to rolling hills, dry grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean. Occasionally they'd see another ranch in the distance, but Gabe steered them clear of any established roads, keeping to deer trails and creek beds that offered cover. Around mid-morning, Evelyn's mare stumbled slightly, and Gabe immediately called a halt. She's favoring her left front, he said, dismounting to check the horse's hoof. Not lame yet, but she's got a stone bruise. We push her much harder and she'll go fully lame, and then we're in real trouble. What do we do? We slow down, let her set the pace for a while. It'll add maybe an hour to our travel time, but better that than being on foot. He looked up at Evelyn. You can ride double with me if you want. Give Willow a break. The thought of sharing a horse with Gabe, of being that close to him, made her suddenly nervous. I'll walk for a while. Lead her. In those boots? He glanced at her worn leather boots, suitable for ranch work, but not for miles of walking. You'll have blisters in under a mile. I'll manage. Evelyn. He stood, his voice gentle but firm. This isn't about pride or propriety. This is about getting to town safely and quickly. We're already married in all the ways that matter. We're just making it legal. Riding double for a few miles isn't going to compromise anything. He was right, and she knew it. But accepting help, accepting closeness, meant acknowledging the strangeness of her situation. She was running away with a man she barely knew, about to marry him, about to trust him with everything. "All right," she said finally. Gabe led his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Ranger, alongside a rock outcropping. "Step up here, then swing your leg over behind the saddle. I'll be in front. You hold on to my waist. It's not comfortable, but it works." She did as instructed, her face burning as she settled behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. He was solid and warm, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You all right back there?" he asked. "Fine," she managed, though her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. They rode like that for the better part of 2 hours, Willow following on a lead rope, moving at an easy pace that favored the mare's sore hoof. At first, Evelyn held herself stiff, maintaining as much distance as possible. But gradually, as exhaustion set in, she found herself relaxing against Gabe's back, her head occasionally resting against his shoulder. He never commented on it, never made her feel uncomfortable. He simply rode, occasionally pointing out landmarks or telling her stories about his previous cattle drive, the river crossing that nearly turned into disaster, the night they lost half the herd to a lightning storm, the kindness of strangers along the way who'd helped when help was needed most. "You're a good storyteller," Evelyn said at one point. "Had plenty of practice. Trail drives are long and boring mostly. You learn to spin a tale or go crazy from the silence." "Is that what we're doing? Going crazy?" She felt him chuckle, the vibration traveling through his back to her. "Maybe. But if we're going crazy together, at least we'll have company." The sun was directly overhead when they finally saw the town in the distance. A collection of wooden buildings clustered around a crossroads, with a church steeple rising above the rest. Cotton Springs, population maybe 200 on a good day. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business before they knew it themselves. "That's where we're getting married?" Evelyn asked, a flutter of nerves hitting her stomach. "That's the place. Small enough that news travels slow, big enough to have a proper justice of the peace." Gabe slowed the horse as they approached the outskirts. "Once we're married, we'll send a telegram to your father. Let him know you're safe and you've made your choice. Then we ride hard for the territorial line. He'll come after us. Probably, but by then we'll have hours head start, and once we cross into Montana territory, his authority ends. McGraw might try to follow, but he's got no legal claim on you once you're married to someone else." They rode into town cautiously, drawing a few curious stares from people on the street. Gabe tied the horses outside a modest building with a sign reading "Justice of the Peace, Harold Winters, Esquire." "This is it," he said, helping Evelyn dismount. Her legs nearly buckled after hours in the saddle, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "You ready?" Was she ready? To marry a stranger, to tie her life to his in the eyes of the law and God, to take a leap into the unknown based on nothing more than trust and desperation? "No," she said honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." Gabe smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "That's the spirit." The justice of the peace was a portly man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles and an air of world-weary patience. He looked up from his desk as they entered, his eyes moving from Gabe to Evelyn and back again. "Help you folks?" he asked. "We'd like to be married, sir," Gabe said. "Today, if possible. If—" Winters set down his pen. "Today. In a hurry, are we? I'm trailing cattle north to Montana. Can't spare more than a day in town." "I see." Winters looked at Evelyn. "And you, miss? You want to marry this man?" Every eye in the room was on her. This was it. The moment where she could still back out, still change her mind, still return to the life she knew, even if it meant marrying Silas McGraw. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I want to marry him." "You got a name?" "Evelyn Hartwell." Something flickered in Winter's expression. Recognition, maybe. The Hartwell name was known in the county, especially lately with the drought and the rumors about McGraw's interest in their land. "Hartwell," he repeated. "Thomas Hartwell's daughter?" "Yes, sir." "Does your father know you're here?" Evelyn lifted her chin. My father knows I'm of age and capable of making my own decisions. It wasn't exactly an answer, and Winters knew it, but after a long moment, he nodded. All right then. I'll need 2 witnesses. You got anyone in town who can stand up for you? Just us, Gabe said. Winters sighed. Wait here. He disappeared into a back room and returned with 2 people, a woman who looked to be his wife, plump and kindly-faced, and a younger man who was probably their son. They took their positions without comment, clearly used to this particular duty. Names? Winters asked, pulling out a large ledger. Gabriel Callahan, Evelyn Hartwell. Winters recorded the information in careful script, then looked up. Join hands, please. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as Gabe took it. His grip was warm and firm, steadying. Do you, Gabriel Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Gabe said clearly. And do you, Evelyn Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? This was it. The words that would change everything. I do, Evelyn whispered. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Winters closed the ledger with a thump. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Callahan. Gabe looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She gave the slightest nod, and he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to her forehead. Not her mouth, she noticed. A kiss of respect, not possession. Congratulations, Winters said, though his tone suggested he had doubts about the wisdom of their union. That'll be $5 for the license and ceremony. Gabe paid without hesitation, and Winters provided them with an official marriage certificate, signed and sealed. Evelyn stared at the document, at her new name written in elegant script, Mrs. Evelyn Callahan. It felt like looking at a stranger's life. Thank you, sir, Gabe said, carefully folding the certificate and tucking it into his coat pocket. Is the telegraph office open? Should be. 2 buildings down on the right. They stepped back out into the bright afternoon sun, and Evelyn took a deep breath. She'd done it. She was married. To a man she'd known for 3 days. You all right? Gabe asked softly. I don't know yet, she admitted. Ask me again in a week. He smiled. Fair enough. Come on, let's send that telegram and get moving. We've got a lot of miles to cover before dark. The telegraph office was run by a nervous young man who kept glancing at Evelyn with obvious curiosity. Gabe dictated the message while Evelyn stood by the window, watching the street. To Thomas Hartwell, Hartwell Ranch. Evelyn safely married to Gabriel Callahan this day. Headed north to Montana. Do not follow. She chose this freely. Signed, Gabriel Callahan. That's awful blunt, the telegraph operator said. Truth usually is, Gabe replied. How long before it's delivered? I can have it out within the hour. Your ranch is on the regular delivery route. Good enough. Gabe paid and turned to Evelyn. Ready to ride? They collected their horses and headed north, keeping to a steady pace that would eat up miles without exhausting the animals. Willow seemed recovered from her earlier soreness, moving more freely now. The landscape opened up before them, endless sky and rolling prairie, and despite everything, Evelyn felt a strange sense of lightness. She'd done it. She'd chosen. They rode for hours, stopping only briefly to water the horses and eat a cold meal of dried meat and bread Gabe had purchased in town. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Gabe started looking for a place to camp. There, he said finally, pointing to a copse of cottonwood trees near a small stream. Good water, some shelter from wind. We'll camp there tonight. He'd been right about his ranch hands taking a different route. They'd seen no sign of Frank or Jesse all day. When Evelyn asked about them, Gabe explained they'd meet up 2 days north at a predetermined location where the cattle could graze while they all rested. They'll be fine, he assured her. Frank's been trailing cattle for 30 years. He knows every trick in the book. As they made camp, Evelyn found herself watching Gabe work. He moved with efficient economy, every motion purposeful, unsaddling the horses, hobbling them so they could graze but not wander, building a small fire, setting up a simple camp with practiced ease. This was a man who'd spent more nights under stars than under a roof, and it showed. "You've done this a lot," she observed, "most of my life." He glanced at her as he worked. "My father was a drover, followed the cattle from Texas to Kansas every summer. I went with him from the time I could sit a horse until the day he died." "What happened to him?" "Stampede. I was 17. One of the hands spooked the herd in the night, and my father tried to turn them before they ran off a cliff. He managed it, but his horse went down and—" Gabe shook his head. "It was quick, at least. He didn't suffer. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But it taught me to respect cattle and fear them in equal measure. They're not smart, but they're strong. And when they panic, they'll kill you without meaning to." He had coffee in his pack, real coffee. And as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge, they sat by the fire drinking it from tin cups. It was strange, this domesticity with a stranger. Strange, but not uncomfortable. "Tell me about your mother," Gabe said after a while. "What was she like?" Evelyn wrapped her hands around her cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "She was fierce. That's the word that comes to mind first. Fierce in her loves, fierce in her protections. She ran that ranch as much as my father did, made all the decisions about the house and garden and finances. Pa might have owned the land, but Mama owned everything else. Sounds like a strong woman. The strongest I've ever known. When I was 12, we had a cougar come down from the hills killing chickens. Pa was away at a cattle auction, and Mama sat up 3 nights with his rifle, waiting. On the 3rd night, the cougar came back and she shot it dead from the porch. Didn't even wake me and Samuel. That's how calm she was about it." Gabe smiled. "I would have liked to meet her." "She would have liked you, I think, or at least she would have respected what you did, giving someone a choice." Evelyn's throat tightened. "She died in May. Fever came on fast, took her in 3 days. One moment she was tending her garden, the next she was gone. Pa just fell apart. And without her there to be the strong one, he started making desperate decisions. Like promising you to McGraw." "Like promising me to McGraw," Evelyn agreed. "Mama would have shot him herself before letting that happen." They were quiet for a while, watching the fire burn down to coals. Overhead, the stars were so thick they looked like spilled salt across black cloth. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. "What happens when we get to Montana?" Evelyn asked. "Really happens, I mean. Not the polite fiction we tell other people, but the truth between us." Gabe considered the question, his face half-shadowed by firelight. "Honestly, I don't know. I meant what I said about this being an arrangement, about you having your own space and choices. But beyond that," he shrugged. "I guess we figure it out as we go. Learn to live together, work together, maybe become friends, if we're lucky. And if we're not, if this doesn't work, then we figure that out too. I'm not a man who forces things, Evelyn. If you wake up one day and realize you've made a terrible mistake, we'll find a solution. Annulment, maybe, or just going separate ways. I won't trap you in something that makes you miserable." "You'd really let me go? After all this?" "After all this," he confirmed, "because the point wasn't to trap you in a different cage. The point was to give you freedom. What you do with that freedom is up to you." Evelyn studied him across the fire, this man who'd become her husband in the span of a few hours. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more demanding, maybe. Someone who'd want something from me in exchange for his help." "I do want something," Gabe said quietly. "I want you to be happy. I want you to have the life you choose, not the one forced on you. And selfishly, I want to not spend the rest of my years alone in a house I built for a future I thought I'd have. But those wants don't require you to be anything other than yourself. That's the most generous thing anyone's ever said to me." "Then you've been around the wrong people." He stood, brushing off his pants. "It's late, and we've got another hard day tomorrow. You should rest. I'll take the first watch." "Watch? For what?" "Your father, McGraw. Whoever might decide to follow." He nodded toward his bedroll, already laid out near the fire. "You take that. I'll sleep in the saddle if I need to." "Gabe, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You're my wife now, even if it's just paper and words. That means I protect you. That's not negotiable." There was steel in his voice, the same steel she'd heard when he talked about standing up to Silas McGraw. This was a man who kept his promises, who did what he said he'd do. She was starting to realize how lucky she was that he'd ridden into her life when he did. "Wake me in a few hours," she said. "We'll split the watch. I can shoot, and I'm not helpless." He looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Deal. Now rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow's going to be long." She settled into the bedroll, which still carried Gabe's scent, leather and horses and campfire smoke. It should have felt strange, sleeping in a strange man's bed under open stars with her entire life upended. But instead, wrapped in wool and exhaustion, she felt something she hadn't felt since her mother died. She felt safe. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was Gabe's silhouette against the stars, keeping watch, keeping his promise, keeping her free. She woke to the sound of hoofbeats. For a moment, disoriented by sleep and darkness, Evelyn couldn't place where she was. Then everything rushed back, the flight from the ranch, the marriage, the camp by the stream, and those hoofbeats, growing closer. Gabe was already moving, his rifle in hand, positioned between her and the sound. "Stay down," he said quietly. "Might be nothing. Might be something." Evelyn reached for her own rifle. She'd brought her father's old Winchester, more for hunting than fighting, but it would do. She crouched behind a fallen log, heart hammering, as three riders emerged from the darkness into the edge of their firelight. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she recognized the led rider, and relief and dread hit her simultaneously. It was Samuel. Her brother dismounted quickly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Behind him, Frank and Jesse, Gabe's ranch hands, also dismounted, looking apologetic. "Don't shoot," Samuel called. "Evie, it's me." "Papas." Samuel. "Ma." Gabe lowered his rifle slightly, but didn't put it away. "How did you find us?" "I followed you from the ranch," Samuel said, moving closer into the light. His face was dirty and exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed. "I knew you were leaving last night, Evie. I saw you packing. I waited an hour after you left, then followed. I've been trailing you all day, staying far enough back that you wouldn't spot me." "Samuel, you shouldn't be here," Evelyn said, emerging from behind the log. "Pa will be—" "Pa knows I'm gone. Left him a note saying I went to check the north fence. He'll figure it out eventually, but by then—" Samuel's voice cracked. "Evie, I couldn't let you just disappear. I couldn't." She went to him, and he grabbed her in a fierce hug, his whole body shaking. "I was so scared," he whispered against her hair. "So scared you'd vanish, and I'd never see you again. I left you a letter. Letters aren't the same as knowing you're alive and safe." He pulled back, looking at her face, then at Gabe. "Are you safe?" "I'm safe," she assured him. "Samuel, this is Gabe Callahan, my husband. We were married this afternoon." Samuel's eyes widened. "Married? You actually did it?" "I did." "And you?" Samuel turned to Gabe, his young face hardening with protective fury. "You better treat her right, mister, or husband or not. You'll answer to me." Gabe's expression softened. "I intend to treat her better than right. You have my word on that." "Words are cheap." "True enough. But they're all I've got to offer right now, besides action. And my action was to give your sister a choice when she had none. That's worth something, I hope." Samuel studied Gabe for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "It's worth something, but I'll be watching. If I hear you've hurt her, I'll come north and make you regret it." "Fair enough," Gabe said seriously, treating the 16-year-old's threat with the respect it deserved. "I'd expect nothing less from a good brother." Frank cleared his throat. "Boss, the kid caught up to us about 3 hours ago. Figured you'd want to know he was coming rather than have him blunder in unexpected. That's why we brought him along." "Good thinking." Gabe finally lowered his rifle completely. "You three eaten?" "Not since this morning," Jesse admitted. "Then let's get some food in you before we figure out what happens next." They rebuilt the fire and shared what supplies they had. Not much, but enough for a sparse meal. As they ate, Samuel told them what had happened after Evelyn left. "Pa found your letter around dawn. I've never seen him like that, Evie, angry and scared and ashamed all at once. He rode straight to McGraw's place, got there before the telegram even arrived. McGraw was—" Samuel paused, choosing his words carefully. He wasn't happy. Started talking about kidnapping charges, about sending men after you. Pa tried to calm him down, but McGraw was raging. Said no woman makes a fool of him. Said he'd hunt you down personally if he had to. Evelyn's stomach clenched. How long ago was this? I left about 2 hours after Pa did, so maybe 10 hours ago now? Samuel looked worried. McGraw's got money and men, Evie. If he decides to come after you, let him try, Gabe said flatly. We'll be across the territorial line before he can organize a proper pursuit. And even if he catches up, we've got the marriage certificate. Evelyn made her choice legally and freely. McGraw has no claim. You don't know him, Samuel said. He doesn't care about legal. He cares about winning, about getting what he thinks is his. Then he's going to learn a hard lesson about the difference between thinking something is yours and it actually being yours. Gabe looked at Evelyn. But the kid's got a point. We need to move faster than I planned, which means we ride through the night, at least for tonight. Put as many miles as possible between us and McGraw before he can act. The horses, Evelyn started, we'll manage. We'll walk them through rough patches, let them rest when we can. But we need distance more than we need rest right now. Frank nodded agreement. Cattle will slow us down some, but we can push them at night if we're careful. They won't like it, but they'll do it. What about me? Samuel asked. I'm not going back, Evie, not now. Pa sold you to save his land, but I'm not part of that deal. I'm coming with you. Samuel, no. Your place is at the ranch with Pa. My place is with my sister, Samuel said stubbornly. Pa made his choice. I'm making mine. I'm coming north with you, and you can't stop me. Evelyn looked helplessly at Gabe, who shrugged. He's got a point. Forcing him back would just make him try again, and next time he might not find us. Better to have him where we can see him. Keep him safe. But Pa... We'll survive, Samuel said harshly. He's got his precious land and his water rights. He doesn't need me. But you might, Evie. You might need family in this new place you're going. And I'll be damned if I let you face it alone. There was something in his eyes, determination, yes, but also hurt. Their father's betrayal had cut Samuel deep, maybe deeper than Evelyn, because he'd looked up to Thomas Hartwell his whole life, believed in him completely. That belief was shattered now, and Samuel was grasping for something solid to hold on to. If that something was his sister, she couldn't deny him. All right, she said quietly. All right, you can come. But Samuel, it's going to be hard. No going back once we cross that territorial line. No changing your mind when you miss home. You understand? I understand, he said, and I'm sure. Gabe stood, decisive now that the decision was made. Then we pack up and ride. Frank, Jesse, get the cattle moving. Samuel, you ride with them. Help keep the herd together. Evelyn rides with me until her horse is completely sound. We'll rotate leads so everyone gets rest, but we don't stop for more than water breaks until dawn. Agreed? Everyone nodded, energized by purpose and the urgency of their situation. They broke camp quickly, scattering the fire and loading pack horses with efficient speed. As Evelyn prepared to mount behind Gabe again, Samuel caught her arm. Are you happy? He asked quietly. Really, truly happy with this choice? She thought about it, about the fear and uncertainty, about the future stretching unknown before her. But she also thought about the alternative, about standing in Silas McGraw's house as his wife, watching her spirit slowly suffocate. I'm free, she said. That's not the same as happy yet, but it's the start of it. That's good enough for me, Samuel said, and hugged her once more before mounting his own horse. They rode north through darkness, the stars their only light, the sound of cattle and hoofbeats their only music. It should have been terrifying, fleeing into the unknown, leaving everything familiar behind. But somehow, with Gabe steady in front of her and Samuel riding alongside, with the promise of Montana ahead, Evelyn felt something unexpected. She felt hope. They rode through this darkness for hours, the rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional lowing of cattle, the only sounds breaking the vast silence of the prairie night. Evelyn dozed against Gabe's back, jerking awake periodically when her grip loosened, only to find his hand reaching back to steady her before she could slip. He never complained, never suggested they stop, just kept Ranger moving at a steady pace that ate up miles while conserving the horse's strength. Dawn broke gradually, bleeding pale gold across the eastern horizon, and with the light came a landscape transformed. They'd left the drought-stricken Badlands behind during the night. Here, the grass grew thicker, greener, nourished by streams that still ran clear. The air smelled different too, cleaner somehow, carrying the scent of pine from distant mountains that rose like purple shadows along the western skyline. "We're close to the territorial line," Gabe said, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Another 4 hours, maybe 5, and we'll be across." "How can you tell?" Evelyn asked, lifting her head from his shoulder where it had been resting. "The land changes. Wyoming's high desert mostly, but Montana's got more water, more trees. You can feel it in the air." He shifted slightly in the saddle, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness. "We'll stop at Cottonwood Springs, just across the line. There's a church there, proper one with a white steeple. I'd like to do this right, if you're willing." "Do what right?" "Our marriage. What we did in that justice's office was legal, but it wasn't what a woman should have for her wedding day. No flowers, no celebration, just signatures on paper." He glanced back at her, his blue eyes serious in the growing light. "Cottonwood Springs has a real minister. Methodist, I think. We could say our vows again, make it feel more real, more like a choice than an escape." Something warm unfurled in Evelyn's chest. "You don't have to do that." "I know. But I want to. You deserve better than a rushed ceremony in front of a suspicious justice of the peace." He paused. "Unless you'd rather not." "It's your choice, Evelyn. It's always your choice." She thought about it as they rode, watching the sun climb higher and paint the world in shades of amber and gold. A real wedding, in a real church, with her brother there to witness it. Not the elaborate affair her mother had probably dreamed of for her daughter, but something genuine, something chosen, something that felt less like running away and more like running toward. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like that very much." Behind them, Frank called out that the cattle were flagging and needed water. They stopped at a creek, letting the animals drink and graze while the humans shared a sparse breakfast of hardtack and the last of the jerky. Samuel looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but his jaw was set with determination. "You holding up all right?" Evelyn asked him. "I'm fine." He took a long drink from his canteen, then splashed water on his face. "Is it always like this, trailing cattle?" "Most times it's worse," Frank said with a dry chuckle. "At least we're not dealing with river crossings or Indian troubles. This here's an easy drive, all things considered." "Easy," Samuel muttered, but there was a hint of pride in his voice. He was proving himself, and he knew it. Gabe checked the horse's hooves, examined the cattle for any signs of injury or illness, and consulted briefly with Frank and Jesse about the route ahead. When he returned to where Evelyn sat on a fallen log, he settled beside her with a quiet sigh. "Your mare's sound now," he said. "You can ride her the rest of the way if you want. Give both her and Ranger a break from carrying double." "All right." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for last night, for letting me sleep. You must be exhausted." "I've gone longer without sleep trailing cattle through storm country." He stretched his back, joints popping. "But I won't lie, I'm looking forward to a real bed when we get home." Home. The word hung between them, strange and foreign. Evelyn had never been more than 20 miles from the ranch where she'd been born. The idea of home being somewhere else, somewhere she'd never seen, with people she barely knew, should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like possibility. "What's Cottonwood Springs like?" she asked. "Small, maybe 50 people, a church, a general store, a blacksmith. Folks there are good people mostly, ranchers, farmers, some trappers who come down from the mountains. They mind their own business, help when help's needed, and don't ask too many questions." He smiled slightly. "You'll like the minister's wife, I think, Clara Whitmore. She runs a small school for ranch children, teaches them reading and arithmetic, sharp as a tack and kind as summer rain." "You know them well?" "I stop there every time I make the drive south. Clara feeds me like I'm one of her students, and Reverend Whitmore always wants to hear news from down south." Gabe's expression softened. "They're good people, the kind that make you believe the world's better than it sometimes seems." They mounted up again. Evelyn on Willow this time. and continued north. The land rose gradually, foothills giving way to higher country, and the air grew cooler, crisper. They passed other ranches now, distant buildings and cattle dotting the landscape, but Gabe kept them moving, not stopping to socialize or explain their presence. It was late afternoon when they saw the white church steeple rising above a cluster of cottonwood trees. Cottonwood Springs looked exactly as Gabe had described, a handful of buildings gathered around a crossroads, modest but well-maintained, with the church standing slightly apart on a small rise. "Frank, Jesse, take the herd to the grazing land just north of town," Gabe instructed. "There's good grass and water there, and Old Man Henderson won't mind. Samuel, you go with them. Help get the cattle settled. Evelyn and I have some business to attend to." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, protective instincts warring with exhaustion, but finally nodded. "You take care of her," he said to Gabe, and there was warning in his young voice. "On my life," Gabe replied seriously. They rode to the church, and Gabe helped Evelyn dismount. Up close, the building was simple but beautiful. White-painted wood that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Tall windows with real glass, and that steeple pointing toward heaven, like a prayer made solid. A woman emerged from the parsonage next door, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that crinkled with smile lines. "Gabriel Callahan," she called, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "I heard you were making another drive. Come in, you must be starving." Then she noticed Evelyn, and her eyebrows rose. "And you've brought a guest. How lovely." "Clara, this is Evelyn, my wife." Gabe said it simply, but there was pride underneath the words. "We were married 2 days ago in Wyoming, but I was hoping Reverend Whitmore might be willing to bless the union properly, make it official in God's eyes, as well as the laws." Clara's sharp gaze moved between them, taking in Evelyn's travel-worn clothes, the exhaustion in both their faces, the way Gabe stood slightly in front of Evelyn as if still protecting her from some unseen threat. Whatever she read in that quick assessment, she kept to herself. "Well now," she said warmly, "that's wonderful news. Congratulations to you both. James is in the church preparing Sunday's sermon, but I'm sure he'd be delighted to perform a ceremony." She gestured toward the parsonage. "But first, Evelyn dear, you look like you could use a proper wash and perhaps a dress that hasn't spent 2 days on horseback. Come with me." "I don't want to impose," Evelyn started. "Nonsense. It's no imposition to help a bride prepare for her wedding, rushed though it may be." Clara linked her arm through Evelyn's. "Gabriel, you go speak with James. We'll join you shortly." Gabe looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded, and he headed toward the church while Clara guided her into the parsonage. Inside, the house was cozy and welcoming, smelling of fresh bread and lavender. Clara led Evelyn to a small bedroom and produced a basin of warm water, soap, and clean towels with the efficiency of someone used to caring for travelers. "Now then," she said, closing the door for privacy, "you wash up, and I'll find something suitable for you to wear. You look about the same size as my daughter was before she married and moved to Denver." "Mrs. Whitmore, I should explain—" "Clara, please. And you don't need to explain anything unless you want to." Clara's eyes were kind but knowing. "I've been a minister's wife for 20 years, Evelyn. I've seen all manner of situations that bring people to our door. The only thing I care about is whether you're here of your own free will and whether Gabriel Callahan is treating you right." "I am, and he is," Evelyn said, and realized she meant it completely. "Then that's all that matters." Clara opened a trunk and began pulling out clothes. "The rest is between you, him, and God. Now wash your face, dear. You've got dust from 3 states on it." The warm water felt like heaven on Evelyn's skin, washing away not just dirt, but some of the tension she'd been carrying. Clara returned with a simple but beautiful dress, pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, modest but pretty. "It was my daughter's Sunday dress," Clara said, helping Evelyn into it. "She'd be happy to know it's being used for a wedding, even an unexpected one." The dress fit reasonably well, just slightly loose in the waist. Clara produced a brush and worked through the tangles in Evelyn's hair with patient gentleness, then braided it simply and wound it into a soft knot at the base of her neck. "There," she said, stepping back to examine her handiwork. "You look lovely, dear. A proper bride. Evelyn caught sight of herself in a small mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked older somehow, but also more alive than she had in months. There was color in her cheeks, light in her eyes, and something else, something that looked almost like joy. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." Clara handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers, hastily gathered but arranged with care. "Every bride should have flowers. Now come, let's not keep the men waiting." They walked to the church together, and Clara pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the space was simple but sacred, with rows of plain wooden pews and an altar at the front beneath a large wooden cross. Afternoon light streamed through the windows, painting everything in soft gold. Gabe stood at the altar with Reverend Whitmore, but he turned as they entered, and the expression on his face made Evelyn's breath catch. He looked at her like she was something precious, something worth cherishing, and when he smiled, it reached all the way to his eyes. He'd cleaned up too, face washed, hair combed, wearing a clean shirt that Clara must have provided. He looked younger without trail dust, handsome in a rugged, honest way that had nothing to do with polish and everything to do with character. "You look beautiful," he said as she approached, and the simple sincerity of it meant more than any flowery compliment could have. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, and was rewarded with a quick grin. Reverend Whitmore was a tall, lean man with silver hair and a gentle face weathered by years of frontier ministry. He smiled at them both, his eyes warm. "Gabriel tells me you've already been married legally, but you'd like to seal that commitment before God and witnesses. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Evelyn said. "If you're willing." "Of course I'm willing. Marriage is a sacred covenant, and it's my honor to help you affirm it properly." He opened his Bible, then paused. "Before we begin, I should ask, are you both entering this marriage freely, without coercion or false pretenses?" "We are," Gabe said firmly. "Evelyn chose this, chose me. I want to make sure she knows that choice is honored, in God's eyes and mine." Whitmore's expression softened further. "That's a good answer, son. All right then, let's begin. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Evelyn like a benediction. This wasn't the rushed, suspicious ceremony in the justice's office. This was real, sacred, a choice being sanctified. When it came time for vows, Whitmore didn't just use the traditional words. He asked them each to speak from the heart. Gabe went first, taking both of Evelyn's hands in his. "I promise to protect you, to respect your choices, to give you the freedom to be whoever you want to be. I promise to be honest with you, to work alongside you, and to never make you feel like property or possession. And I promise that if you decide to love me someday, I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of it." Evelyn's eyes burned with unexpected tears. She hadn't prepared anything, hadn't expected this, but the words came from somewhere deep and true. "I promise to trust you with my freedom, which is the most precious thing I have. I promise to work beside you, to build something together, to be honest even when it's hard. And I promise that I'll try, really try, to build a life with you, not just exist beside you." She paused, then added softly, "You gave me a choice when no one else would. I promise not to take that gift lightly." "Do you have rings?" Whitmore asked. Gabe shook his head. "Not yet, sir. We left in some haste." "That's all right. The rings are symbols, but the promises are what matter." Whitmore placed his hand over their joined ones. "Gabriel Callahan, Evelyn Hartwell." "Callahan, you have declared your intentions before God and these witnesses. I now pronounce you husband and wife in the eyes of the Lord. And this time," he added with a gentle smile, "you may kiss your bride properly." Gabe looked at Evelyn, that same question in his eyes. She nodded, and he cupped her face gently with one hand and kissed her. It was soft, sweet, and achingly tender. Not a kiss of passion, but of promise, of new beginnings and careful hope. When they pulled apart, Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest, some last piece of her old life falling away to make room for whatever came next. Clara was crying happily, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Beautiful, just beautiful. Now you must stay for supper. I won't hear any arguments. Clara, we should keep moving, Gabe started. Nonsense. You've been riding for 2 days straight, and your cattle need rest as much as you do. One evening won't make a difference, and I'll not have it said that a couple left my home on their wedding day without a proper meal. Gabe looked at Evelyn, who found herself nodding. The urgency that had driven them across the territorial line had eased slightly now that they were in Montana. One evening to breathe, to rest, to feel like newly married people instead of fugitives. It sounded like heaven. We'd be honored, Gabe said. They sent word to Frank to bring Samuel to the parsonage, and Clara set about preparing a feast with the kind of determined efficiency that brooked no opposition. Within an hour, the table was laden with roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and even a pie made with the last of Clara's canned cherries. Samuel arrived scrubbed clean, his eyes widening at the spread. Is this all for us? It's a wedding supper, Clara said firmly, and every wedding deserves celebration, even small ones. They ate until they were full, the conversation flowing easily. Reverend Whitmore told stories of his frontier ministry, Clara shared news of the town and neighboring ranches, and gradually Evelyn found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since before her mother died. This was what family could feel like, she realized. Not blood necessarily, but chosen people who cared for you and celebrated with you and made you feel like you belonged. As the sun set and lamps were lit, Clara insisted they stay the night. You have a perfectly good bed in the guest room, and I'll not send a bride out to sleep on the ground on her wedding night. Gabe looked uncomfortable. Clara, that's generous, but the arrangement between Evelyn and me is your business and none of mine, Clara cut him off gently. The bed is large enough for 2 people to sleep in without crowding, and I trust you both to handle yourselves appropriately. Samuel can bunk with Frank and Jesse out by the cattle. Now stop arguing with me, Gabriel Callahan. You'll lose. Despite everything, Evelyn found herself smiling. There was something comforting about Clara's bossy kindness, the way she simply decided what was best and made it happen. They eventually gave in, and Samuel headed out to join the ranch hands while Clara showed them to the guest room. It was small but tidy, with a real bed covered in quilts and a window that looked out over the cottonwoods. Sleep well, Clara said, closing the door behind her. And then they were alone, truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. The awkwardness descended immediately. Gabe cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at the bed. I can sleep on the floor. Don't be ridiculous. We've been riding together for 2 days, and Clara's right that the bed is big enough. Evelyn tried to sound more confident than she felt. We're adults. We can manage to share a sleeping space without it meaning anything we're not ready for it to mean. You're sure? I'm sure. She turned her back to give him privacy and began removing her shoes. Though I'll keep my clothes on, if that's all right. Of course, I will too. They prepared for bed with exaggerated care not to look at each other, moving around the small room like dancers following choreography. Finally, they settled into the bed, Gabe on one side and Evelyn on the other, a careful foot of space between them. Good night, Gabe said to the ceiling. Good night, Evelyn replied. They lay in silence, both pretending to sleep while actually being hyper-aware of every breath, every small movement. It was ridiculous, Evelyn thought. They were married. They'd spent hours riding pressed against each other. Why did this feel so much more intimate? Maybe because this was a choice. Not necessity, not urgency, but choosing to trust each other in vulnerable quiet. Gabe, she said after a while. Yeah? Thank you, for today, for the church, the ceremony. It meant something. Good. It was supposed to. He paused. Evelyn? Yeah? I meant what I said in my vows. All of it. I know, she whispered. I did too. The silence that followed was warmer, more comfortable. Evelyn's exhaustion finally caught up with her, and she felt herself drifting toward sleep. Just before she went under, she felt Gabe's hand reach across the space between them, not touching but there, offering comfort, offering presence. Without thinking, she moved her own hand to meet his, their fingers barely touching. It wasn't romance. It wasn't passion. It was something simpler and perhaps more important. It was partnership. It was trust. It was the beginning of something real. She woke to the sound of rain. For a moment, disoriented in the unfamiliar room, Evelyn panicked. Then the events of yesterday rushed back, and she realized the other side of the bed was empty, though still warm. Through the window, she could see dawn breaking gray and wet, rain coming down in steady sheets. The door opened quietly, and Gabe entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're awake." "Good. We've got a problem." Evelyn sat up, accepting the coffee gratefully. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that comes with thunder and lightning in cattle country." He moved to the window, his face grim. "Frank says there's a big storm moving in from the west. Not just rain, but a real tempest. We need to get the herd to shelter before it hits full force, or we'll have a stampede on our hands." "How long do we have?" "Hour, maybe 2. The cattle are already restless, and once that lightning gets close—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Evelyn had seen what frightened cattle could do. She'd witnessed a small stampede once that had destroyed fencing and injured 2 horses. She was on her feet immediately, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "What do you need me to do?" "You should stay here, where it's safe. I grew up on a ranch, Gabe. I know cattle, and I can ride. What do you need me to do?" He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Frank and Jesse are moving the herd toward a canyon about 2 miles north. Natural shelter, high walls that'll keep them contained if they spook. Samuel's helping, but we need every hand. You think you can keep up?" "Try me." They dressed quickly, Evelyn changing back into her riding clothes with Clara's help while Gabe saddled the horses. Within 20 minutes, they were riding hard through the rain toward where Frank was trying to keep the increasingly agitated cattle moving in the right direction. The storm was building fast, the sky darkening to a bruised purple-black, wind picking up and carrying the smell of lightning. The cattle were lowing constantly now, eyes rolling white with fear, and it was taking all of Frank and Jesse's skill to keep them from scattering. "Samuel, take the left flank," Gabe shouted over the rising wind. "Evelyn, with me on the right. We push them into the canyon mouth and pray we get there before the lightning hits." They spread out, each rider taking position, and began the delicate work of herding frightened animals toward safety. It was hard, dangerous work. Cattle pushed too hard would panic and run, but moved too slowly they'd scatter when the storm hit. It required perfect timing, perfect instinct, and no small amount of luck. Thunder rumbled, still distant but getting closer. The cattle surged forward, and for a moment Evelyn thought they'd lost control. But Gabe was there, turning Ranger into the lead, guiding rather than forcing, and slowly the herd settled back into forward motion. They were halfway to the canyon when the lightning started, brilliant white forks splitting the dark sky, followed by thunder that shook the ground. The cattle bellowed in terror, and several broke from the herd, running blind. "Jesse, get those strays!" Frank yelled. Jesse wheeled his horse and took off after the running cattle, but more were breaking away now, the herd's cohesion failing. They were losing control, and when that happened in a storm, people died. Then Evelyn saw it. A young cowhand she hadn't noticed before, one of the local boys Clara had mentioned who sometimes helped with trail drives. He'd gotten ahead of the herd trying to turn the lead cattle, but his horse stumbled in the mud and went down. The boy rolled clear, but he was directly in the path of the panicked cattle now bearing down on him. No one else was close enough. In seconds he'd be trampled. Evelyn didn't think. She drove Willow forward, ignoring Gabe's shout of warning, directly into the path of the stampede. She had seconds, less than seconds, to reach the boy, haul him up behind her, and get clear. Time seemed to slow and speed up simultaneously. She felt Willow's powerful muscles bunch and stretch beneath her as the mare responded to her desperate urging. The boy looked up, his face white with terror, and she reached down, grabbing his arm with strength born of pure adrenaline. "Grab on!" she screamed. He did, his hands locking around her arm, and she pulled him up even as Willow was already turning, running, racing the stampede for their lives. Behind them, cattle thundered past the spot where the boy had fallen, missing them by inches. They made it clear, bursting out of the herd's path and into open ground, and Evelyn finally let Willow slow, both of them heaving for breath. The boy slid off the horse and collapsed to his knees in the mud, shaking violently. You saved my life!" he gasped. Evelyn couldn't answer. The enormity of what she'd just done, the risk she'd taken, hit her all at once, and she started shaking too. She'd nearly died. Nearly gotten herself and Willow killed, but the boy was alive. That had to count for something. Then Gabe was there, grabbing Willow's reins, his face terrible with fear and fury. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking that boy was going to die if someone didn't help him." "So you rode into a goddamn stampede? You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." She glared at him, her own fear transmuting into anger. "And neither was he." For a moment they stared at each other through the driving rain, both soaked and furious and alive. Then Gabe did something unexpected. He reached up, pulled her down from Willow's back, and crushed her against his chest in a hug so tight she could barely breathe. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he said roughly against her hair. "Don't ever." "I can't promise that," she said, but her arms wrapped around him too, holding tight. "Not if someone needs help." "Then promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't throw your life away being reckless." "I promise to be as careful as I can be while still being who I am. That's the best I can give you." He pulled back enough to look at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Before she could process what was happening, he kissed her, hard and desperate and real, nothing like the gentle kiss in the church. This was a kiss born of fear and relief and the raw reality of how fragile life was. When he pulled away, they were both breathing hard. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize," Evelyn interrupted. "Don't you dare apologize." Thunder cracked directly overhead, and they both jumped. The storm was on them now, lightning turning the world white every few seconds. Rain so heavy it was hard to see more than a few feet. "Canyon!" Frank's voice cut through the storm. "Everyone to the canyon!" They mounted quickly and rode hard, the cattle now moving with purpose toward shelter, the worst of the panic past. The canyon loomed ahead, high rock walls creating a natural corral, wide enough for the herd but narrow enough to contain them. They pushed the last of the cattle through the opening, then Frank and Jesse positioned themselves at the mouth to keep any from bolting back out. Inside the canyon, protected from the worst of the wind and lightning, the herd gradually calmed. The rain continued, but the thunder was moving away now, the storm passing as quickly as it had come. Everyone was soaked, exhausted, and shaking with adrenaline come down. Samuel found Evelyn and hugged her fiercely. "I saw what you did," he said. "Evie, that was the bravest, stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Runs in the family, apparently," she replied, thinking of their mother shooting the cougar. The young cowhand she'd saved approached hesitantly, his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." "What's your name?" Evelyn asked. Danny Morrison. My pa runs the ranch east of here." "Well, Danny Morrison, next time check your footing before you ride ahead of a spooked herd. And you're welcome." "Yes, ma'am, I will. I promise." As Danny walked away, Gabe appeared at Evelyn's elbow. His anger had cooled, replaced by something that looked like awe mixed with exasperation. "You're full of surprises, Mrs. Callahan." "So are you, Mr. Callahan." She met his eyes, remembering that kiss, the desperate relief in it. "So are you." They stood together in the rain, muddy and exhausted and alive, while around them the cattle settled and the storm rolled away east. Overhead, the clouds began to break apart, letting through shafts of sunlight that painted everything in shades of gold and silver. "Come on," Gabe said finally. "Let's get back to the parsonage and dry off before we catch our deaths. The cattle are safe now, and Frank and Jesse can watch them while we rest." They rode back slowly, all the urgency burned out of them by fear and relief. At the parsonage, Clara took one look at them and immediately began heating water for baths and preparing hot food, clucking over them like a mother hen. "I heard about what you did," she said to Evelyn as she handed her a cup of hot tea. "Danny's father rode by to spread the word. Says you're the bravest woman he's ever heard of." "I'm not brave," Evelyn said. "I was just in the right place at the wrong time." "That's what brave people always say," Claire replied. "The truly courageous never think they are. They just do what needs doing." Later, after they'd bathed and changed into dry clothes, Gabe found Evelyn sitting on the parsonage porch, watching the sun set through the clearing clouds. He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I need to say something," he began. "If it's another lecture about being reckless, it's not." He was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. "What I saw today, the way you rode into danger without hesitation to save someone who needed help, that's who you are. That's the woman I married. And I realized something. What? I said I'd give you freedom, give you space, not ask for anything you weren't ready to give. I meant that, and I still do. But I need you to know. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious and intent. I need you to know that when I kissed you today, when I pulled you off that horse and held you like I'd never let go, that wasn't just relief. That was me realizing that at some point in the last 3 days, you stopped being a woman I was helping and became someone I couldn't imagine losing. Evelyn's breath caught. Gabe, you don't have to say anything back. You don't have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know that if you decide someday that you want this marriage to be more than an arrangement, more than just convenience or protection, I'm ready. I'll be ready whenever you are, even if it's never. But I'm here, Evelyn, and I'm yours, if you'll have me. She looked at this man who'd given her freedom when she had none, who'd stood between her and harm, who'd just offered her his heart with no demands for hers in return. And she realized that somewhere between running away and running toward, somewhere between escape and choice, she'd stopped seeing him as a stranger and started seeing him as Gabe, as hers. Ask me in a month, she said quietly, when we're at your ranch, when we've had time to build something real instead of something desperate. Ask me then how I feel, and I'll give you a real answer. A month, he agreed. I can wait a month. I can wait as long as you need. He took her hand, and this time she laced her fingers through his and held on. They sat like that as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and stars began to emerge one by one, like promises written across the vast Montana sky. Whatever came next, whether her father sent men after them, whether McGraw made good on his threats, whether building a life together turned out harder than either imagined, they'd face it together. She'd chosen this. Chosen him. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt like the future was something she was writing herself, one choice at a time. The storm had passed, and they were still standing. That was enough for now. Everything else could wait for tomorrow. They left Cottonwood Springs 3 days later, after the storm had fully passed, and the cattle had recovered their strength. Claire packed them enough food for a week and made Evelyn promise to write once they were settled. Reverend Whitmore blessed their journey and gave them directions to avoid the roughest mountain passes. Danny Morrison's father sent 2 of his ranch hands to help move the herd through difficult terrain, refusing payment and saying only that a life debt deserved repayment. The journey north took another week, crossing high country where snow still capped the peaks even in summer, following rivers that ran so clear you could count stones on the bottom, passing through valleys where wildflowers grew thick as carpet. Each day they rose early and rode until dusk, the rhythm of trail life becoming familiar. Breaking camp, moving cattle, making camp, standing watch, sleeping under stars that seemed close enough to touch. Evelyn found herself settling into the work, her body adapting to long days in the saddle, her hands growing calloused from rope and reins. She rode alongside Gabe most days, learning the subtle language of cattle drives, how to read the herd's mood, when to push and when to let them rest, the 1,000 small skills that separated successful drovers from dead ones. Samuel thrived in the work too, his youth giving him endless energy that Frank harnessed with patient teaching. By the end of the first week, her brother could rope a stray, read trail signs, and cook decent beans over a campfire. He was becoming a man before her eyes, shaped by work and wilderness into something stronger than the boy who'd left Wyoming. But as they drew closer to Montana's interior, to the land Gabe called home, Evelyn felt a different kind of tension building. They'd been living in a bubble of sorts, always moving, always focused on immediate survival, with no time to think about what came after. Now after was approaching fast, and with it came questions she wasn't sure how to answer. What would their life look like? Would they truly be able to maintain the careful distance Gabe had promised? Or would proximity and daily life erode those boundaries? And more confusing, did she want those boundaries to stay intact, or was she hoping they might dissolve naturally into something else? She thought about that kiss in the rain, the desperate relief and raw emotion in it. She thought about lying next to him in Clara's guest bed, the warmth of his hand almost touching hers. She thought about the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was something precious and surprising in equal measure. And she thought about her own heart, which seemed to be developing opinions she hadn't given it permission to have. On the 8th day out from Cottonwood Springs, they crested a ridge and Gabe reined in Ranger, his face transforming with something that looked like pure joy. "There," he said, pointing to the valley below. "That's home." Evelyn looked where he indicated and felt her breath catch. The valley was beautiful, a bowl of green nestled between mountains, with a river cutting through it like a silver ribbon. She could see a house, barn, and outbuildings clustered near the river bend, surrounded by fenced pastures where grass grew thick and lush. Beyond the immediate ranch, the land rolled away in gentle swells toward distant peaks that glowed purple in the afternoon light. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. "Wait until you see it up close." There was pride in Gabe's voice, the pride of someone who'd built something with their own hands. "Come on, we're losing daylight." They descended into the valley, the cattle spreading out as they scented water and good grazing. By the time they reached the ranch proper, the sun was touching the mountain peaks, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The house was exactly as Gabe had described, solid log construction with a wide porch facing east, stone chimney rising from one end, windows with real glass that reflected the sunset. It was modest but well built, the kind of structure that would stand for generations. As they dismounted, a figure emerged from the barn, a woman perhaps 60 years old, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing men's work clothes and carrying a pitchfork like she knew how to use it. "About time you got back, Callahan," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "Was starting to think you'd gotten yourself killed down in Texas." Then she noticed Evelyn and Samuel, and her eyebrows rose. "And you brought company. That's new." "Martha, this is Evelyn, my wife." Gabe helped Evelyn down from Willow, his hand lingering at her waist. "And her brother Samuel. They'll be staying." "Evelyn, Samuel, this is Martha Grimes. She manages the ranch when I'm away and keeps me from burning down the kitchen when I'm home." Martha's sharp eyes moved from Evelyn to Gabe and back again, taking in their travel-worn clothes, the way they stood close but not quite touching, the careful politeness that marked relationships still finding their footing. "Wife," she repeated. "Well now, that's a development. You leave here a bachelor and come back married. Must be quite a story." "It is," Gabe acknowledged. "And I'll tell it over supper, if you're willing to cook for a crowd. We're all starving for something that isn't trail food." "I suppose I can manage that." Martha's stern expression softened slightly as she looked at Evelyn. "Welcome to the ranch, Mrs. Callahan. It'll be nice to have another woman around. Gets tiresome being surrounded by men who think beans and bacon constitute cuisine." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "And please call me Evelyn." "I'll call you whatever feels right once I know you better," Martha replied, but there was no meanness in it. "For now, let's get you cleaned up and fed. The men can handle the cattle." She led Evelyn toward the house while Gabe, Samuel, Frank, and Jesse began the work of settling the herd. Inside, the house was clean and sparsely furnished, a main room with fireplace and rough-hewn table, a kitchen area with a good stove, and 2 doors leading to what must be bedrooms. "Gabe built most of this himself," Martha said, showing her around with obvious pride. "Took him 2 years, working between trail drives. That's his room there on the right, has the big bed he hauled up from town. Other rooms smaller, just a cot, really. I sleep there when I stay over during bad weather." She opened the door to Gabe's room, and Evelyn peered inside. It was simple: a large bed covered with quilts, a chest of drawers, a single window looking out toward the mountains. The walls were bare except for one framed photograph of a woman who must have been Gabe's mother, her face serious but kind. "You'll be sharing this room with him, I suppose," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Being married and all, I'll make up the small room for your brother." "Actually," Evelyn started, then stopped. How did she explain the arrangement without sounding ridiculous? That they were married but not really married, sharing a life but not yet sharing everything? Martha watched her struggle for words, then made a dismissive sound. "Never mind. It's none of my business what arrangements you and Gabe make. You want the small room? I'll make it up for you. You want to share with your husband? That's your choice. Either way, there's clean linens in that chest." "Thank you," Evelyn said gratefully. "Don't thank me yet. Living on a ranch this remote, you'll earn your keep. Can you cook?" "Yes, ma'am." "And clean, sew, tend a garden, preserve food, handle a rifle, and manage accounts if needed." Martha's expression shifted to something like approval. Good. You're not some city girl playing at frontier life then. That'll make things easier. She headed toward the kitchen. Come on, help me get supper started. The men will be hungry enough to eat a horse by the time they're done. They worked together preparing food, and Evelyn found herself relaxing under Martha's brisk efficiency. The older woman didn't pry or gossip, just asked practical questions about cooking preferences and dietary restrictions, treating Evelyn like a partner rather than an interloper. By the time the men came in, the table was laden with roasted venison, biscuits, beans cooked with salt pork, and fresh greens from Martha's garden. They ate with the single-minded focus of people who'd been working hard and living rough, conversation minimal until the edge was off their hunger. Finally, Martha set down her fork and looked at Gabe. All right, now tell me this story. How does a man go south for cattle and come back with a wife and her brother? Gabe glanced at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving permission, and he began the tale. He told it simply, without embellishment. Evelyn's father's deal with McGraw, the forced engagement, his offer of an alternative, their flight north and marriage. Martha listened without interruption, her weathered face unreadable. When Gabe finished, she was quiet for a long moment, then turned to Evelyn. That true? All of it? Every word, Evelyn confirmed. And you chose this? Chose running off with a near stranger over marrying some rich rancher? I chose freedom, Evelyn said. Gabe just helped me claim it. Martha studied her, then nodded slowly. Good answer. Freedom's worth more than gold or security, though most people don't figure that out until it's too late. She looked at Gabe. You did right bringing her here. Question is, what happens when the people you left behind come calling? You think they will? Samuel asked, his face pale. Rich men don't like being made fools of, Martha said bluntly. And fathers who trade daughters for land don't like losing their bargaining chips. Someone will come eventually, looking for answers or revenge. You best be ready for it. I'm ready, Gabe said quietly. Let them come. Easy to say now, harder when there's guns involved. I've handled guns before. I know you have. Martha's eyes were sharp. But this isn't some range war or cattle rustler. This is personal, and personal makes people stupid. You'll need to keep your head. I will, Gabe promised. And I've got Frank and Jesse. Between us, we can handle whatever comes. Hope you're right. Martha stood, gathering plates. For now, you all look dead on your feet. Get some rest. Morning comes early on a working ranch. Frank and Jesse headed out to the bunkhouse, and Samuel was shown to the small room where Martha had indeed made up the cot with clean linens. That left Evelyn and Gabe standing awkwardly in the main room, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. You take the bed, Gabe said finally. I'll sleep out here by the fire. Gabe, don't be ridiculous. It's your house, your bed, and you're my wife, which means you get the bed. Besides, I've slept in worse places than a floor in front of a warm fire. We could... Evelyn stopped, uncertain if she was ready to finish that sentence. Could what? We could share, like we did at Clara's. It worked fine then. Gabe looked at her, really looked, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Hope, maybe, mixed with caution. You sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't feel pressured. I feel tired and practical. We're both adults, we're married, and there's a perfectly good bed in there that's big enough for two people to sleep without it being awkward. She lifted her chin, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Unless you don't want to. It's not about what I want, he said quietly. It's about what you're comfortable with. I'm comfortable with sharing a bed for sleeping, if you are. Nothing more than that yet, but we don't have to pretend we're strangers, Gabe. We're past that now. He smiled, that warm smile that reached his eyes. All right, together it is. They prepared for bed with the ease of people who'd spent a week on the trail, exhaustion trumping self-consciousness. Evelyn changed into a nightgown Martha had found for her while Gabe turned his back, and they settled into the bed on opposite sides, maintaining that same careful distance they'd had at the parsonage. But this time felt different. This wasn't a guest room in a stranger's house. This was Gabe's home, their home now, and lying here felt less like an arrangement and more like a beginning. Evelyn? Gabe said into the darkness. Yeah? I'm glad you're here. Glad you chose this. I know it's not what you probably imagined for your life, but I'm glad." "So am I," she admitted. "Scared, uncertain, but glad. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." There was a rustle of blankets, and she felt his hand reach across the space between them, palm up, offering. "Good night, Evelyn." She placed her hand in his, feeling his fingers close gently around hers. "Good night, Gabe." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped in the darkness, and for the first time since leaving Wyoming, Evelyn dreamed of something other than flight. She dreamed of roots growing deep, of home becoming real, of a future that was uncertain, but hers to shape. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and routine. Evelyn threw herself into ranch life with determination, learning the rhythms of the place, making it hers by degrees. She took over the kitchen for Martha, who'd been managing it with minimal enthusiasm, and began planning a proper garden for next spring. She mended clothes that had been neglected, organized the cluttered storage room, and even helped with cattle work when extra hands were needed. Samuel flourished too, working alongside Frank and learning everything the older man could teach. He was young and tireless, eager to prove himself, and Gabe treated him not as a boy, but as a full member of the ranch crew. Evelyn watched her brother grow taller, stronger, more confident with each passing day, and felt grateful that at least one good thing had come from their flight north. As for Gabe, he was everywhere and nowhere, checking cattle, mending fences, planning for winter, teaching Samuel, consulting with Frank about breeding stock. But every evening he came back to the house, and they'd share supper and conversation, then retire to that shared bed where they slept close but careful, hands finding each other in the darkness, but nothing more. It was a strange sort of courtship, Evelyn thought, getting to know someone after marrying them, building intimacy through daily life rather than romance. But it felt right somehow, honest in a way that formal courting never would have been. She was starting to understand who Gabe Callahan was beneath the quiet competence, a man who'd been shaped by loss and hard work into something both gentle and immovably strong. He was patient with animals and people alike, fair in his dealings, quick to laugh at himself and slow to anger at others. He never raised his voice, never used his physical strength to intimidate, and treated everyone from Martha to the youngest ranch hand with the same steady respect. And he was unfailingly kind to her, in ways both large and small. He noticed when she was tired and sent her to rest. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listened to her answers. He made her feel not like property or burden, but like a partner whose presence made his life better. It was getting harder to remember why she was supposed to keep him at arm's length. The question he'd asked, about waiting a month before she gave him a real answer about her feelings, was approaching its deadline. In 3 more days, it would be a month since they'd left Wyoming. A month since she'd chosen this life, chosen him. She was starting to realize what her answer would be, what it had maybe been all along, even when she was too scared to admit it. But before she could have that conversation, the past caught up with them. It happened on a Wednesday, crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made you grateful to be alive. Evelyn was in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer squash, when Martha came running from the barn, her face tight with concern. "Riders coming, 4 of them, from the south, coming fast." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "McGraw?" "Don't know yet, but Gabe says get to the house and stay there. He and the men will handle it." They ran to the house together, where Gabe was already loading rifles with calm efficiency. Samuel was there too, his young face set and determined, and Frank was checking his pistol with the ease of someone who'd used weapons before. "Stay inside," Gabe said to Evelyn. "No matter what happens, you stay inside unless I call for you. Understand?" "Gabe, I can help. I know you can, but right now I need to know you're safe so I can focus on whatever's about to happen. Please, Evelyn, trust me on this." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about control or protection born of condescension. This was about a man who just found something precious and couldn't bear to lose it. "All right," she agreed. "But if shooting starts, I'm not staying in here like a helpless damsel. I'll shoot back." Despite everything, he smiled. "I'd expect nothing less. Just wait for my signal." The riders appeared over the rise, and Evelyn's worst fears materialized. She recognized them immediately. her father on his gray gelding, Silas McGraw on a flashy bay, and two of McGraw's men, both wearing guns like they knew how to use them. Dutch, McGraw's foreman, was one of them, his scarred face grim and purposeful. Gabe walked out to meet them, Frank slightly behind and to his right. They stopped 20 feet from the approaching riders, and Gabe's hand rested casually near his gun, not threatening, but ready. Through the window, Evelyn watched her father's face as he recognized her standing behind the glass. Pain and anger warred in his expression, but also something that might have been shame. "Callahan," McGraw said, not bothering with pleasantries, "you've got something that belongs to me. I've come to collect." "Nothing here belongs to you," Gabe replied, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Everything and everyone on this ranch is here by choice. The girl's father and I had an arrangement. She was promised to me. She's not a girl, she's a woman. And arrangements made without her consent aren't worth the paper they're written on." Gabe's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Evelyn made her choice. She chose freedom, and she chose me. That's the end of it." McGraw's face darkened. "You kidnapped her, coerced her into a false marriage. That's a hanging offense in some territories. Then you'll need to prove coercion, which you can't, because it didn't happen." Gabe pulled the marriage certificate from his pocket. "We were legally married in Wyoming by a justice of the peace, then again in Montana by a Methodist minister. 2 ceremonies, both legal, both witnessed. Evelyn's my wife, freely and fairly." "Pa," Evelyn called through the window, unable to stay silent any longer. Tell him it's true." Thomas Hartwell looked at his daughter, and she saw the moment something broke in him. His shoulders slumped, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with defeat and regret. "It's true, McGraw. I talked to the justice in Cotton Springs on the way here. He confirmed the marriage was legal, that Evelyn consented freely. There was no coercion." "You're taking his word for it?" McGraw snarled. "Your daughter runs off with a stranger, and you just accept it." "What else can I do?" Thomas's voice cracked. "I pushed her into this by trying to force her into something she didn't want. This is my fault, McGraw. All of it. I should have found another way to save the ranch instead of trading my daughter like she was livestock." "So that's it? You're just giving up?" "There's nothing to give up on. She's married, she's made her choice, and as much as it hurts that she chose a stranger over coming home, I understand why." Thomas looked at the house, at Evelyn watching from the window. "I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry for what I tried to do to you." Tears stung Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I know, Pa, but I can't come back. This is my home now." McGraw's hand moved toward his gun, and instantly Gabe's hand was on his own weapon, matched by Frank. The 2 ranch hands with McGraw tensed, and for a moment the whole scene balanced on the edge of violence. "Don't," Gabe said quietly. "Don't make this into something that ends with people dead. You've lost, McGraw. Accept it with grace and ride away." "You think I'll just let you make a fool of me, let you steal what's mine? She was never yours. People aren't property to be owned." Gabe's voice was hard now, all pretense of politeness gone. "And if you draw that weapon, if you threaten my wife or anyone on this ranch, I will put you down. That's not a threat, McGraw. That's a promise." For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then Thomas Hartwell did something unexpected. He dismounted and walked forward, positioning himself between McGraw and Gabe. "Enough," he said firmly. "McGraw, I'll pay you back the water rights. It'll take me years, but I'll do it. I'll sell cattle, I'll mortgage the land, I'll do whatever it takes. But this ends now. My daughter's not part of any deal anymore." "You can't afford—" "Then I'll lose the ranch. But at least I'll lose it with my soul intact." Thomas looked back at McGraw, and there was something in his face that Evelyn hadn't seen since her mother died. Strength, resolve, the man he used to be before desperation broke him. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I'm done making it worse by trying to fix it with more mistakes. Evelyn's free. That's final." McGraw stared at him, rage and disbelief warring in his expression. Then his eyes cut to Dutch, some unspoken communication passing between them. It happened fast. Dutch's hand went for his gun, and Frank was already moving, drawing and firing in one smooth motion. The shot echoed across the valley, and Dutch's gun fell from his hand as he grabbed his bleeding shoulder, cursing viciously. The other ranch hand froze, hands raised, clearly wanting no part of a fight he couldn't win. McGraw's hand had moved toward his gun but stopped when he found himself staring down the barrel of Gabe's revolver. "Next person who draws gets more than a shoulder wound," Frank said calmly, his gun steady. "Your choice, gentlemen." McGraw's face was mottled with fury, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He yanked his horse's head around viciously. "This isn't over, Callahan." "Yes, it is," Gabe replied. "It's over because I'm saying it's over, and because you don't have the law or right on your side. Come back here again with threats or violence, and you'll find yourself answering to the territorial marshal. I know people, McGraw, good people who don't take kindly to men like you trying to force women into marriages against their will. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not meeting Evelyn sooner." Gabe lowered his gun slightly but didn't holster it. "Now get off my land, and take your injured man to a doctor before he bleeds out." Dutch was helped onto his horse by the other ranch hand, and together they started to turn away. McGraw followed, but Thomas Hartwell remained, standing in the yard, looking up at the house where his daughter watched. "Can I talk to her?" he asked Gabe quietly. "Just for a minute? Then I'll go, and I won't come back unless she asks me to." Gabe looked back at the house, at Evelyn. She nodded, and he stepped aside. Evelyn came out onto the porch, her arms wrapped around herself against the autumn chill and the cold fear that had been gripping her chest. Her father climbed the steps slowly, like a man much older than his years, and stopped a few feet away. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Thomas said. "What I did, trying to sell you to McGraw, there's no excuse for it. I was desperate and scared, and I made the worst choice a father could make." "You did," Evelyn agreed, not softening the words. "You made me feel like I was worth less than land, less than water rights, less than your pride." "I know." His voice broke. "Your mother would have shot me herself if she'd been alive to see what I did. She always said you were the strongest of all of us, that you'd do great things if we let you, and I tried to clip your wings because I was too weak to save myself any other way." "So what now, Pa? What happens to you and Samuel?" She paused. "Samuel's staying here, by the way. That's his choice, and I won't send him back even if you ask." "I know. He left me a letter before he followed you, said he'd rather build something new with his sister than watch me destroy what we had." Thomas smiled sadly. "Smart kid. Takes after you, not me. The ranch will survive or it won't, but it'll survive or fail based on my choices, not yours. I meant what I said to McGraw. I'll pay him back for the water rights, even if it takes everything I have. And if I lose the place," he shrugged, "then I lose it. But I'll lose it as a man who finally did right by his daughter, even if it was too late to matter." Evelyn felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "It's not too late, Pa. It's not too late to matter." "You mean that?" "I'm still angry, still hurt, but you stood up for me today when it counted. That means something." She stepped forward and hugged him, feeling his arms come around her in return, tentative and grateful. "Write to me. Let me know you're all right. And maybe someday I'll come visit. Bring my husband to see the old place." "I'd like that." Thomas pulled back, wiping his own eyes. "He treats you well, this Callahan fellow?" "Better than well. He treats me like a partner, not property, like a woman who has value beyond what she can bring to a marriage contract." She glanced back at Gabe, who was watching from a respectful distance. "He's a good man, Pa. The kind of man I would have chosen anyway, if I'd had the freedom to choose." "Then I'm grateful to him, for giving you what I tried to take away." Thomas descended the steps, then turned back. "You be happy, Evelyn. That's all your mother and I ever really wanted for you. Just be happy." "I will be," she promised. "I think I already am." She watched him mount his horse and ride away, following the tracks McGraw and his men had left. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by regret and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. But he also looked lighter, like he'd put down a burden he'd been carrying too long. When he disappeared over the ridge, Gabe came to stand beside her. "You all right?" he asked. "I think so. It's strange. I was so angry at him, and I still am in some ways. But seeing him stand up to McGraw, seeing him finally choose me over the ranch," She leaned against him, and his arm came around her shoulders naturally. It doesn't erase what he did, but it helps. It helps to know he regrets it. He's lucky to have you as a daughter, luckier than he deserves, probably. Maybe, but he's still my father. She looked up at Gabe. Thank you for not shooting anyone. I know it was close. Frank's the one who actually shot. I was just encouraging Dutch not to do anything else stupid. He paused. Are you sure you're all right? That was a lot, seeing them all show up like that. I'm all right. Better than all right, actually. She turned to face him fully. Gabe, it's been almost a month. I know. You asked me to wait a month before I gave you a real answer. About us, about this marriage, about how I feel. His expression grew serious, hope and fear mixing in those blue eyes. You don't have to answer yet if you're not ready. I said a month, but there's no deadline, Evelyn. You take whatever time you need. I don't need more time. She took a breath, gathering courage. When I rode into that stampede to save Danny, you kissed me like you were afraid you'd lost something precious. And I realized in that moment that I was afraid too. Afraid that I might die without ever telling you that somewhere along the way this stopped being an arrangement for me. Evelyn, let me finish. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating fast beneath her palm. You gave me freedom when I had none. You gave me respect when I was being treated like property. You gave me a home and a future and never asked for anything in return. And somewhere in all of that, you gave me something I wasn't expecting and didn't know I wanted. What's that? You gave me yourself, your kindness, your strength, your patience, the way you look at me like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings and choices are important, the way you make me laugh, the way you hold my hand in the dark, the way you've never once made me feel trapped or obligated or less than equal. Her voice shook slightly. So yes, Gabe Callahan, yes to whatever you were asking when you said I could have you if I'd take you. Yes to making this marriage real, to building something together that's more than just convenience or protection. Yes to you. For a moment, he just stared at her, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then he cupped her face in both hands and kissed her, not desperate like in the storm, not gentle like in the church, but deep and sure and full of promise. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, and Evelyn felt like something fundamental had shifted in her world, like she'd just stepped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. I love you, Gabe said, the words simple and true. I think I started falling the moment you stood up to your father about marrying McGraw, and I fell completely when you rode into that stampede without hesitation. You're the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known, and I love you. I love you too, Evelyn whispered, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I love you, and I choose you, and I choose this life we're building together. He kissed her again, and this time when she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed close, there was no hesitation, no careful distance, just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and decided to hold on. Behind them, Martha cleared her throat loudly. Well now, I suppose this means we'll be needing separate rooms after all, just not the way I thought. They broke apart, both laughing, and Evelyn felt joy bubble up inside her chest like champagne. This was real. This was happening. This was her life, chosen and claimed and hers. Come on, Gabe said, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. Let me show you our ranch properly. Our home. I want you to see everything, know everything, be part of everything. They walked together into the autumn afternoon, hand in hand, while behind them Martha smiled and Frank shook his head and Samuel emerged from the barn, grinning like he'd known all along how this story would end. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, and in its light everything looked new and full of possibility. Evelyn had left Wyoming running from a future she didn't want. Now she stood in Montana, running toward a future she was choosing with every breath, every step, every heartbeat. She'd been offered as payment for land and water. She'd been saved by a stranger's kindness. And now she was home, not because someone had decided it for her, but because she'd decided it herself. That made all the difference. That made everything possible. And as Gabe showed her the ranch, pointing out where they'd expand next spring, and where they'd plant the garden, and where their children might someday play, Evelyn felt her heart expand to hold all the hope and joy and love she'd thought she'd lost forever. This was freedom. This was choice. This was love. This was home. Winter came to Montana the way it always did, gradually at first, with frost painting the grass silver in the mornings, then suddenly, with a snowstorm that buried the valley in white and reminded everyone that survival here required preparation, resilience, and the willingness to help your neighbors when help was needed. Evelyn had never experienced a real winter before. Wyoming got cold, certainly, but nothing like Montana's deep freeze, where temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the bucket between the house and the barn, where snow piled so high against the doors that you had to shovel your way out each morning, where the wind howled through the valley like something alive and hungry. But the ranch was ready. Gabe had spent years preparing for winters exactly like this one, and his planning showed in every detail. The barn stocked with hay and grain, the root cellar filled with preserved vegetables and salted meat, the woodpile high enough to last until spring. The cattle moved to the low pastures where they'd be sheltered from the worst winds. And this year, for the first time since he'd built the place, Gabe wasn't facing winter alone. He had Evelyn. The first real blizzard hit 3 weeks after her father's visit, trapping them all inside for 3 days while the storm raged. They spent those days by the fireplace, playing cards and telling stories, Samuel and Frank arguing good-naturedly about everything from cattle breeding to the best way to cook beans, Martha teaching Evelyn to knit while making pointed observations about men in general and ranchers in particular. But the nights belonged to Gabe and Evelyn alone, in the room that had become truly theirs. They'd moved her few belongings in officially the day after her declaration of love, and Martha had tactfully moved her own things to the small room without comment beyond a knowing smile. Learning to be married, truly married, was a dance of discovery and adjustment. They learned each other's habits and rhythms, the small intimacies that came with sharing not just a bed, but a life. Gabe was an early riser who liked to watch the sunrise with coffee in hand. Evelyn was slower to wake, but came alive in the evenings when he was ready to sleep. He was neat to the point of fastidiousness with his belongings. She was more chaotic, leaving books half-read and projects half-finished scattered around the house. But they fit together somehow, their differences complementing rather than conflicting. He steadied her when she got overwhelmed. She pushed him to take risks he wouldn't have taken alone. He made her laugh with dry observations about ranch life. She made him think about the world beyond the valley's borders. And at night, wrapped in quilts against the cold, they talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, the future they were building together. Sometimes they made love with passionate intensity, celebrating their choice with bodies and breath. Sometimes they just held each other, content with closeness and the comfort of not being alone. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Evelyn said one night, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I'm terrified of bees," Gabe admitted. "You're what?" "Terrified of bees. Got stung about 50 times when I was 8. Disturbed a hive accidentally while herding cattle. Nearly died from the reaction. Now even one bee makes me nervous." Evelyn lifted her head to look at him, finding his expression sheepish. "You face down armed men without flinching, but bees scare you?" "Everyone's afraid of something." "That's mine. What's yours?" She thought about it. "Becoming invisible? Just fading away until I'm nothing but someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's daughter, with no identity of my own. That's what I saw happening when my father arranged that marriage to McGraw. I saw myself disappearing." "You could never be invisible," Gabe said firmly, his hand stroking her hair. "You're too vivid, too strong. You blaze too bright to ever fade." "That's because you see me. But I've watched it happen to other women, good women, who just gradually eroded until they were nothing but function and duty. Then we make sure that doesn't happen. We keep seeing each other, really seeing each other, even when life gets hard and busy and complicated. We keep talking like this, sharing like this. We don't let the dailiness of life erase the people we are underneath all the roles we play." He tilted her chin up so he could kiss her. "Deal?" "Deal," she agreed and sealed it with another kiss that led to other things, the kind of things that made her grateful for solid log walls and the storm outside that drowned out any sounds that might have carried. When spring finally broke winter's grip, the ranch came alive with activity and new life. Calves were born, filling the barn with their uncertain bleating. The garden plot was turned and planted, and Evelyn found herself working alongside Martha to create something that would feed them all through the next winter. Samuel had grown 3 inches over the cold months, his voice finally settling into something that didn't crack, and he worked as hard as any man on the ranch, earning Frank's grudging respect and genuine affection. Letters came from Wyoming with the first supply wagon from town. Thomas Hartwell wrote regularly, his words careful and formal at first, gradually warming as Evelyn responded with news of her new life. He'd sold half his herd to pay back McGraw and was managing the rest with the help of 2 hired hands. The ranch was smaller but sustainable, and he sounded, if not happy, at least at peace with his choices. "He wants to visit," Evelyn told Gabe one evening, holding the latest letter. "Says he'd like to see where I'm living, meet you properly, maybe stay a week if we'd have him." "What do you want?" Gabe asked, setting down the harness he'd been mending. "I want—" She paused, examining her feelings. "I want to show him I'm happy. I want him to see that his worst mistake led to my best choice, and maybe I want him to see that you can rebuild after you've lost everything, that it's possible to start over." "Then invite him. We've got room, and I'd like to meet the man who raised you properly." "He didn't, though. Mama raised me. He just tried to sell me off." "But somewhere in him is the man who is worthy of your mother's love. Maybe that's the man we'll meet when he comes." Gabe came to sit beside her, taking her hand. "And even if it's not, even if he's still broken and struggling, he's your father. You get to decide what relationship you want with him, but I'll support whatever you choose." The invitation was sent, and 6 weeks later Thomas Hartwell arrived on a rented horse, looking older and grayer but also somehow lighter than the last time Evelyn had seen him. He shook Gabe's hand formally, thanked Martha for her hospitality, and then stood awkwardly in the yard until Samuel barreled into him with a fierce hug that made them both tear up. That week was healing in ways Evelyn hadn't expected. Her father worked alongside the men during the day, proving he could still pull his weight despite his age. In the evenings, he sat on the porch with Evelyn and told stories about her mother, stories she'd never heard, filling in pieces of the woman she'd lost and helping her understand the marriage her parents had shared. "She would have loved this place," Thomas said one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. "The wildness of it, the freedom. Margaret never liked feeling fenced in." "I get that from her, I think," Evelyn said. "You get everything good from her, your strength, your courage, your certainty about who you are and what you want." He looked at his daughter. "I get that you can't forgive me completely. Maybe you shouldn't, but I hope you can understand that I was lost without your mother, and lost men make terrible choices. I understand, Pa, and I do forgive you, not because what you did was forgivable, but because holding on to anger was making me bitter, and I don't want to be bitter. I want to be happy." "Are you?" "Happy." Evelyn looked across the yard to where Gabe was showing Samuel how to shoe a horse, their heads bent together in concentration, and felt warmth spread through her chest. "Yes, I really am. This life, this place, this man, it's everything I didn't know I wanted, everything I would have missed if you hadn't pushed me away hard enough that I had to run toward something better." "Then maybe my mistake wasn't entirely without purpose," Thomas said quietly. "Maybe sometimes God uses our worst choices to lead people to their best destinations." "Maybe," Evelyn agreed. "Or maybe you just got lucky that I was brave enough to choose freedom over security." "That too," he acknowledged with a sad smile. The day before Thomas left to return to Wyoming, he asked to speak with Gabe privately. They walked out beyond the barn, and Evelyn watched from the window, curious but not worried. Whatever was said between them took nearly an hour, and when they returned both men looked satisfied, their handshake firm and genuine. "What did he want?" Evelyn asked later, after her father had gone to bed in the guest room. "To apologize for trying to force you into a marriage against your will. To thank me for giving you the choice he should have given you himself. And to tell me that if I ever hurt you, he'll ride up here and shoot me personally. Arthritis and old age be damned." Gabe smiled. "I like him. The man he is now, anyway. The man he's trying to become." "So do I," Evelyn admitted. "It's strange. I didn't think I could ever feel that way about him again after what he did. But people change, I guess. Or maybe they just find their way back to who they were supposed to be all along." Thomas left the next morning with promises to write more often and an open invitation to return any time. As he rode away, Samuel beside him for the first few miles, Evelyn felt a chapter close, not with bitterness or anger, but with something like resolution. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be forgiven, and in forgiving, she found she'd freed herself from carrying its weight. Summer came in full force, and with it came the busiest time on a ranch. Cattle needed to be moved to high pastures, fences needed mending after winter damage, hay needed cutting and storing, and 100 other tasks that kept everyone working from dawn until dark. But there was joy in the work too, the satisfaction of seeing things grow and thrive under their care. It was during haying season that Evelyn first felt the telltale signs that made her suspect what her body had been trying to tell her for weeks. She'd been tired more than usual, queasy in the mornings, her body tender in ways that had nothing to do with hard work. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain, but when she missed her courses for the second month running, she could no longer deny what was happening. She was pregnant. The realization hit her one morning while she was making breakfast, the smell of bacon suddenly overwhelming and nauseating. She barely made it outside before losing what little she'd eaten, and when she straightened up, shaky and lightheaded, Martha was there with a knowing look and a damp cloth. "How long have you known?" Martha asked gently. "Suspected for a few weeks, certain as of about 30 seconds ago." Evelyn wiped her mouth, her hands trembling. "I haven't told Gabe yet." "Why not? He'll be thrilled." "Will he?" "We've only been married 6 months, Martha. This is all still so new." "What if he's not ready? What if I'm not ready?" Martha made a dismissive sound. "Child, no one's ever ready for their first baby. You just do it and figure it out as you go. And that man loves you something fierce. He'll be over the moon." "You think so?" "I know so. Now go tell him before he notices you turning green every morning and worries you've caught some terrible disease." Evelyn found Gabe in the barn, brushing down Ranger after a morning ride to check the cattle. He looked up as she entered, his face breaking into that smile that still made her heart skip. "Hey there, beautiful. You feeling better? Martha said you were sick this morning." "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." She took a breath, suddenly nervous. "Gabe, I need to tell you something." His expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think anything's wrong. It's just—" She laughed, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her, processing. Then his face transformed with pure, incandescent joy. He dropped the brush and crossed to her in 3 long strides, sweeping her up into his arms and spinning her around until she laughed and protested that he'd make her sick again. "A baby," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist, like he needed to touch her to believe this was real. "We're having a baby." "Evelyn, that's terrifying, overwhelming, too fast." "Perfect," he interrupted. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole life is perfect." He kissed her, gentle and reverent. "I love you. I love you so much, and I can't believe I get to do this with you. Build a family, raise children, grow old together." "You really want this? It's not too soon?" "It's exactly the right time," he said firmly, "though I might be a little overprotective for the next 7 months. Actually, I'll definitely be overprotective. You're carrying something precious." "I'm carrying our child, and I'm still perfectly capable of working and living my life, pregnancy notwithstanding." I know. But you can't blame me for wanting to wrap you in cotton wool and make sure nothing happens to either of you." "I absolutely can blame you, and I absolutely won't let you." But she was smiling, touched by his concern even as she prepared to fight any attempt to turn her into a fragile flower. "We're partners, Gabe. That doesn't change just because there's a baby coming." "Partners," he agreed. "Always." They told Samuel that evening, and he whooped with joy, immediately declaring he'd be the best uncle in Montana. Frank offered gruff congratulations and practical advice about baby-proofing the barn. Martha just smiled like she'd known all along and started planning what supplies they'd need and how to convert the small room into a nursery. The pregnancy progressed as summer turned to autumn. Evelyn's body changed, swelling with new life, and she found herself marveling at the strangeness and wonder of it. This small person growing inside her, this future taking shape literally beneath her heart. There were hard days when she felt ungainly and uncomfortable, when morning sickness extended well into afternoon, when her back ached and her feet swelled and she wanted to cry over nothing at all. But Gabe was there through all of it, patient and loving, rubbing her feet when they hurt, holding her hair when she was sick, reading to her at night when she was too tired to do anything but listen. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the mountains and all the things they'd do together. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth and carving birds into the headboard. And slowly, as her body changed and the baby grew, Evelyn felt herself changing too. Not disappearing into motherhood the way she'd feared, but expanding to hold this new role alongside all the others. She was still Evelyn. She was still Gabe's wife, Samuel's sister, a rancher and partner and woman who made her own choices. But now she was also becoming a mother, and that felt less like losing herself and more like discovering new dimensions she hadn't known existed. Winter came again, and this time Evelyn was too pregnant to do much heavy work. She chafed at the restriction but had to admit that carrying water and chopping wood were probably not wise activities in her 8th month. Instead, she focused on preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes, organizing the nursery, talking with Martha about what to expect when labor came. "It'll hurt," Martha said bluntly. "No point lying about that. But you're strong, and women have been doing this since the beginning of time. You'll get through it. What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it. But nothing's going to go wrong. You're healthy, the baby's active, and you've got people who love you ready to help however they can." Martha patted her hand. "Have faith, child. You've survived everything else life's thrown at you. You'll survive this too." The baby came on a February night during a lull between storms, arriving with a speed that surprised everyone, including the midwife from town who barely made it in time. Evelyn labored through the night while Gabe paced outside the bedroom, refusing to leave despite Martha's suggestion that he'd be more useful elsewhere. When the baby finally came, arriving with a lusty cry that filled the house, Martha opened the door to let Gabe in. He stumbled into the room, his face pale and anxious, and stopped dead at the sight of Evelyn propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty and glowing, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your daughter," Evelyn said softly. He crossed to the bed like a man in a dream and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. A perfect little person with dark hair and a button nose and tiny fists that waved imperiously in the air. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She's perfect. You're both perfect. Do you want to hold her?" He nodded, and Evelyn carefully transferred their daughter into his arms. He held her like she was made of glass, his big, work-roughened hands impossibly gentle. And when the baby wrapped one tiny fist around his finger, Evelyn watched her strong, capable husband dissolve into tears. "What should we name her?" he asked. "I was thinking Margaret," Evelyn said. "Maggie for short, after my mother, if that's all right with you." "It's more than all right. It's perfect. Margaret Callahan." He bent to kiss the baby's forehead, then leaned over to kiss Evelyn. "Thank you. For her. For everything. For choosing this life with me." "Thank you for giving me a life worth choosing," she replied. They sat together in the lamplight, the three of them, while outside the Montana winter wrapped the ranch in white silence. A year ago, Evelyn had been running from a future she didn't want. Now she held that future in her arms, squirming and perfect and hers. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal grass already pushing green through the mud. As the weather warmed, life on the ranch resumed its busy rhythm, now with a baby's needs woven into the pattern. Maggie proved to be a good baby, quick to smile, slower to fuss, and she was passed from hand to hand throughout the day as everyone took turns caring for her while Evelyn worked. Samuel was besotted with his niece, constantly offering to hold her and making silly faces that sent her into peals of baby laughter. Frank, gruff and uncomfortable at first, melted completely the first time she grabbed his finger and wouldn't let go. Even Martha, who claimed to be too old and practical for such nonsense, could be found rocking the cradle and singing old lullabies when she thought no one was listening. But it was Gabe who most amazed Evelyn with his transformation into fatherhood. He woke for middle-of-the-night feedings without complaint, changed diapers with increasing competence, and spent hours just watching their daughter sleep with an expression of such wonder that it made Evelyn's heart ache with love. "I never knew," he said one evening, holding Maggie while Evelyn prepared supper. Never knew I could love someone I'd known for such a short time so completely. It's like my heart just expanded to make room for her. That's how I felt about you, Anand, Evelyn admitted, stirring the pot on the stove. When I realized I loved you, it wasn't gradual. It was sudden, like discovering a whole room in a house I thought I knew completely. You're saying I'm like a room? I'm saying you're like coming home to a place I didn't know existed until I found it. He smiled at that warm, open smile she'd come to cherish. We should invite your father to come meet his granddaughter. What do you think? I think I'd like that. And I think Maggie should know her grandfather even if his history is complicated. Thomas arrived 6 weeks later, and the change in him was remarkable. He held his granddaughter with shaking hands and tears streaming down his weathered face, and Evelyn saw in that moment the man her mother had fallen in love with, the man who'd been buried under desperation and poor choices but was fighting to emerge again. She has Margaret's eyes, he said wonderingly, the same gray that could be either soft or stormy, depending on her mood. She's got Gabe's stubbornness, though, Evelyn said. Once she decides she wants something, she doesn't give up until she gets it. Wonder where she learned that, Thomas said with a pointed look at his daughter. They spent a week together, 3 generations of family learning to exist in the same space without old wounds bleeding through every interaction. It wasn't perfect. There were still careful conversations and topics they skirted, but it was healing. It was forward motion. On the day before Thomas left to return to Wyoming, he pulled Evelyn aside while Gabe was out checking cattle. I need to tell you something, he said. I sold the ranch. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Pa, you didn't have to. I did, actually. The debt to McGraw was eating me alive, and trying to work the place alone was breaking me down. So I sold it to a young couple from back east who wanted to try their hand at ranching, got enough to pay off McGraw completely and still have a nest egg left over. Where will you go? That's what I wanted to talk to you about. He looked nervous, uncertain. I was hoping maybe I could buy some land near here. Not on your ranch, I wouldn't impose like that, but nearby. Close enough to know my granddaughter, to be part of her life, but far enough that I'm not in your way. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Pa, you wouldn't be imposing. There's land adjacent to ours that old Henderson wants to sell. It's small, maybe 100 acres, but it's good land with water and timber. You could build something modest, run a few cattle, live simply. You'd want that? Having me nearby? I would. I really would. You made terrible mistakes, Pa, but you're trying to be better. That matters. And I want Maggie to know her grandfather, not as the man who failed, but as the man who got back up and kept going. When Gabe came home that evening and heard the plan, he immediately offered to help Thomas build a cabin on the Henderson property. We can do most of it ourselves, he said. Get it finished before next winter, and you work alongside us, learn every bit of the construction, so when something needs fixing, you'll know how to do it. Thomas accepted with gratitude that bordered on humility, and Evelyn saw her father and her husband shake hands on the deal, sealing not just a business arrangement, but the beginning of a real relationship. The cabin was built that summer, a solid one-room structure with a sleeping loft and a good stone fireplace. Thomas moved in with minimal belongings and maximum determination to prove himself. He worked his small herd carefully, helped on Gabe's ranch when extra hands were needed, and spent every Sunday at their table, sharing meals and stories, and slowly rebuilding the trust he'd broken. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of red and gold, Evelyn stood on her porch one evening with Maggie in her arms, watching the sun set over land that stretched as far as she could see. Gabe came up behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them, and together they stood in comfortable silence. Any regrets? He asked finally, echoing a question he'd asked her months ago. Evelyn thought about everything that had led to this moment. Her father's betrayal, McGraw's threats, the desperate flight north, the uncertainty and fear and risk. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, trapped and terrified, watching her future being sold out from under her. And she thought about the woman she'd become, the life she'd built, the family she'd made. Not a single one, she said, turning to kiss him while their daughter gurgled happily between them. Not a single regret. Good, Gabe said, kissing her again, because I was thinking maybe we should add on to the house. Make more room for when the family grows. Are you suggesting we have more children, Mr. Callahan? I'm suggesting that we have whatever future we want, Mrs. Callahan. More children, bigger ranch, new adventures, whatever we decide together. Together, Evelyn agreed, savoring the word. I like the sound of that. They stood on the porch as stars began to emerge, one by one, like promises being kept. Below them, the ranch lights flickered on, Martha in the kitchen preparing for tomorrow, Frank and Jesse in the bunkhouse playing cards, Samuel in his cabin working on his own dreams of someday having land of his own. And across the valley, a single light shone from Thomas's cabin, marking the place where a man was trying to rebuild what he'd lost. This was home, Evelyn thought. Not the place she'd been born, but the place she'd chosen. Not the life she'd been given, but the life she'd claimed. And every day she woke up here, she was choosing it again, choosing Gabe, choosing Montana, choosing freedom and love, and the hard, beautiful work of building something that mattered. She'd been promised to a stranger for land, until a cowboy had said, I'll protect her. And he had. But more than that, he'd given her the tools to protect herself, the freedom to choose her own path, and the love to make that path worth walking. Her father had tried to trade her like property, but what he'd accidentally done was push her into the arms of a man who saw her as a partner, as an equal, as someone whose choices mattered just as much as his own. And in finding that man, that love, that life, Evelyn had discovered something more valuable than land or water or security. She'd discovered herself. She'd discovered what it meant to be free. And she'd discovered that freedom wasn't just about escaping what you didn't want. It was about running toward what you did want, even when that meant taking risks, making leaps of faith, and trusting that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as desperate chances. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the high peaks, and Maggie made a small sound of contentment, already drowsing against her mother's chest. Gabe's arms tightened around them both, and Evelyn leaned back into his warmth, into his strength, into the absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Tell me a story, she said softly. Tell me about the future. Once upon a time, Gabe began, his voice a rumble against her back, there was a brave woman who refused to let anyone else write her story. She took her life into her own hands and built something beautiful from scratch. And she lived happily, not because everything was perfect, but because she'd chosen it freely and loved it fiercely. That's a good story, Evelyn said, smiling. It's the best story, Gabe corrected, because it's ours, and it's true, and it's only just beginning. They stood together as darkness fell completely, and the Montana sky blazed with more stars than any person could count. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and all the small complications of life. But tonight, they had this moment of peace and love and belonging. Evelyn had been offered his payment for land. A cowboy had offered her protection. And together, they'd built something neither could have imagined alone. A partnership, a family, a home, a love story that started with escape and became a choice renewed every single day. This was freedom. This was love. This was home. And it was perfect.